Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Became the Silver Flame Hero? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Kaken. Izuku. I am here. All Might Speech. Detroit Smash. Special Technique Usage. Baited by Big CC. Chapter 1. Birth of the Silver Flame. Quirks. The unique and varied abilities granted by the quirk factor that had sprung up among humanity and spread wide across the planet. Over the 250 years since the first quirk showed itself in Qingqing, China, quirks had become the sign of normality. Roughly 80% of the world's population possessed a quirk of some description, ranging from something as weak and simplistic as being able to glow in the dark or having lighters for fingers to being able to control the elements and strength capable of leveling buildings with a single blow. In the centuries that followed their emergence, quirks would be categorized into three main categories: emitter, transformation, and mutation. Many subcategories and hybrids would come to exist within those three principal categories, but those three would remain as the basis of quirk classification. On the other hand, the remaining 20% were without a quirk of some description, although as time passed that number would fall lower and lower. Still, the life of a quirkless individual was never easy. Even if someone was an exemplary person in mind, body, and deed, to be without a quirk was to invite discrimination, heartache, and ridicule upon them. Among those who possessed quirks, the dream occupation for many was one previously thought to be the subject of comic books and movies. Heroes. One boy in the city of Mizudafu, Japan, longed to be a hero above all else. In many worlds, this boy would end up as one of the quirkless and suffer from anguish and heartbreak from that fact. In the world shown here, however, the former is not the case but the latter is. 2XX. Streets of Mizudafu, Japan. Come on, Izuku, a young blonde-haired boy, about 4 years old, called out as he ran along the street. Bakugo Katsuki looked back impatiently as a green-haired boy of roughly the same age followed him at a run. "I'm coming, Kaken." Midoriya Izuku panted as he caught up to Katsuki. "Why, you don't have to run so fast. If we went as slowly as you walk, we'd take forever to get to the park," the other boy retorted as he rolled his eyes, but he did moderate his pace somewhat. "I want to show you my quirk somewhere isolated, because it's loud and flashy." "Why, you have your quirk?" Izuku's eyes almost popped out of his head in astonishment before seemingly to sparkle in excitement. "Let's go then. Shoulda known that'd get you moving." Katsuki rolled his eyes again. He had known Izuku since they were two and was used to his obsession with quirks, always eager to ask questions and find out all the details on what they did and how they worked. Truth be told, he himself was excited about his quirk. If the doctor was anything approaching correct about it, he was almost certainly going to be a hero when he grew up. The two boys made their way to the park near their homes and searched for an isolated place to let Katsuki show his friend his quirk. At length, they found a clearing and Katsuki turned to his eager friend. "The doctor said that my quirk's a perfect mix of the old hag's glycerin quirk and my old man's acid sweat quirk. He said they sin mixed really well," he explained. "I'm gonna call it Explosion. That's because I can do this." Turning, he clenched one hand and caused a small popping explosion to erupt from the palm of his hand. It was barely as powerful as a firecracker, but it still made Izuku clap in excitement. "That's awesome, Kaken," he exclaimed excitedly. "I hope my quirk's as awesome as yours when I get it." "Heh." Katsuki puffed his chest out in pride at his friend's praise. "Demon right, my quirk's kick butt." The boys spent several hours happily chatting about Bakugo's new quirk, the blonde bomber eagerly showing it off and his green-haired friend spouting out every idea and theory about it that popped into his overactive mind. Eventually, they had to head home though. It was a journey of no more than 5 minutes to Izuku's home, one that the two young friends had made countless times before. On any other day, they would have been safe. That day, not so much. It was literally just a minute away from the apartment that Izuku shared with his mother that things went wrong. An enormous reptile smashed through houses nearby, plowing straight towards the two. The reptile was the size of a bus, had silver scales, 3 draconic heads, a long and sinuous tail, and wore the torn remnants of jeans and a t-shirt, the super-elastic fibers that made up most clothes worn by transformation quirk barely holding together under the strain. "Start running, brats," the middle head roared. "Or I'll crush wine to paste," the left one continued. "Scram," the right head growled. Being the sensible and bright boys that they were, Izuku and Katsuki turned tail and started running while screaming at the top of their voices. "Holy shit!" Katsuki yelled. "Why is it still following us?" Izuku screamed as he ran like a monster was after him, which was still the case. As Izuku had pointed out, the lumbering beast, which was probably someone's quirk running amok, was still following them, deliberately moving slowly enough to not catch the 2 kids. It was clearly toying with them. "Son of a beach!" Katsuki swore. He had only just recently learned some of the swear words from listening to some late-night TV shows while his parents were out on dates, but he was already putting his newly expanded vocabulary to good use. "Ak!" Izuku yelped as he tripped and fell over, sprawling on the ground with a yelp of surprise and pain. "Izuku!" Katsuki shouted, and was about to skid to a halt when a cry from Izuku made him do that anyway. "Run, Kaken!" Izuku was scrabbling to his feet as he spoke, but the monster was almost upon him. "Get away! Like hell I'm gonna run and leave you behind," the boy roared in fury after a moment of pure shock. He started running back to help Izuku, but the dragon-like monster was on the green-haired boy before Katsuki could move more than 2 paces. Rearing back, a reptilian sneer on all 3 of its faces, the dragon monster moved to squash Izuku beneath one of its large clawed feet. Time seemed to slow down for Izuku. Flashes of his short life seemed to flash past his vision before he screamed in terror and desperation. "Mommy!" An instant later, the leg of the dragon was blasted back by something, sending it staggering away from Izuku before it managed to regain its balance. "What?" All 3 had roared in a mixture of disbelief and pain. Then it looked at Izuku and its jaws dropped. Izuku stood bawling his eyes out in the middle of the street. Surrounding him was a veritable conflagration of silver fire, which had a distinctly liquid appearance, pulsing and flowing around him like a waterfall in reverse. Despite its liquid appearance, the amount of heat the silvery substance was putting off definitely felt like fire. Extremely hot fire to boot. Katsuki, who stood frozen at the sight of what had to be his friend's first quirk usage, couldn't help but smirk a bit at his friend's sudden display of power. The very first time he was using his quirk, and Izuku sent something the size of a bus staggering. As expected of the best friend's sidekick of Katsuki Bakugo. "What are you, brat? Die!" The dragon roared before breathing fire at the boy. As the flames clashed together, the regular orange flames of the 3-headed dragon actually seemed to struggle against Izuku's silver flames. Even so, the fire of the older being gradually pushed back against the boy's newly awoken quirk. Seeing this snapped Katsuki out of his fugue. He had to help his friend. "Izuku, open your eyes, damn it," he shouted. "Fight back, push back and send that oversized gecko BS to D-packing." He was talking out of his butt here. He had no clue if that was what flame quirk users actually did, but he had to say something. For his part, Izuku temporarily stopped crying and cracked an eye open. Seeing the imminent fiery death approaching him, he squeaked in fear and followed his friend's advice in his own way. Moving his hands out, he screamed out, "Stay away!" Seemingly reacting to its creator's panicked intent, the silvery fire suddenly shifted, flowing like water to pool and gather itself more tightly around Izuku before barreling back toward the orange flames. With a purpose now guiding them, the silver flames quickly began overwhelming and seemingly devouring the normal fire, growing more and more as it pushed the orange fire back toward its draconic creator. Unfortunately, Izuku was flagging. Having only just awoken his quirk, he had no practice with it and little to no control over it. However, survival instinct and adrenaline were wonderful things, and they kept the young boy going, knowing that his own flames were the only thing keeping the dragon thing from killing him. Where the F are the heroes? Katsuki thought in a fury. Really, what kind of pansy-butt hero let a 3-headed dragon run rampant all over town? Just as Izuku collapsed to his knees, Teetering on the edge of collapse, a mighty voice boomed out across the street. California smash! An instant later, the dragon monstrosity buckled and collapsed, and an immensely powerful blow slammed into its back from above, cutting off its breath attack and making it gurgle and screech in pain. It also allowed Izuku's flames to surge forth and slam into the silver beast, covering its middle head in silver fire. Texas clap! The voice shouted, and in the next instant, Izuku's flames were extinguished in an instant, with 3 sharp and lightning-swift blows following less than an eye blink later to knock the monster out cold. Whwa? Izuku slurred as he looked up. Standing atop the silver 3-headed dragon was a strongly muscled man wearing a blue, red, and white bodysuit. Blonde hair turned into a pair of long tufts at the front which swept back over his head in a distinct V-shape. "There is no need to worry further, citizens." "Why, you ask?" the man said. "Because I am here." He might. Izuku managed to get out before he fainted, utterly exhausted from the stressful awakening of his quirk and the life-and-death battle he had just endured. "Izuku!" Katsuki shouted and charged in to just barely catch his friend as he started to fall backwards. He wasn't any less of an All Might fan than Izuku, but he had both more self-control and better priorities. Check on his friend first, awe over the man he'd one day surpass later. With All Might, Yagi Toshinori, the #1 pro hero All Might, looked down at the unconscious boy and his friend and cursed himself for arriving late. He had been on the other side of Mizudafu Town when he had heard of the rampaging dragon quirk user, dealing with a troublesome hostage-taking villain. He had dealt with the man swiftly and raced here as fast as he could, only to find 2 boys, neither looked older than 5, threatened by the troublesome dragon. Absently, he hopped off of the dragon as it started to revert to its human form, a European man in his late 20s. Those flames, the silver ones, came from the unconscious boy, he recalled. Flame quirks were fairly common, although those with the strength that the silver flames had shown were not. Aside from Endeavor, there were only perhaps a dozen or so flame quirk users in the hero rankings, ones that could generate and use their own flames at any rate. Flame or heat manipulation quirks were a lot more common, and they tended to go into the fire service. "Young man, is your friend all right?" he asked the blonde-haired boy who had caught the flame user. "Why did no one show up before now?" "Izuku and I were almost killed," the boy responded. "This is the 20th villain attack I have stopped today, so I suspect that the local heroes are all swamped." Toshinori replied before bowing his head slightly. "I am sorry that you were in fear of your life, my boy. It is fortunate that your friend here had a quirk that could hold the villain at bay." He only just awoke it just now, he hadn't had a quirk diagnosis or anything," the boy replied with a gulp. "You." A green-haired blur shot past All Might with incredible speed and careened into the unconscious boy. It was revealed to be a slim woman with green hair, who looked hauntingly like Shimura Nana, Toshinori's former master and the previous bearer of One for All. Shortly afterwards, the woman who was presumably the green-haired boy's mother, who had an astonishingly amazing ability to cry as she cradled her son's unconscious body. Toshinori absently wondered if she had some sort of water generation quirk, was joined by a red-eyed woman with blonde hair and brown-haired man with glasses, who were apparently the parents of the blonde-haired boy. "Damn it, brat, can't you even go to the park and back without causing problems?" Bakugo Mitsuki scolded her son. It would have been more convincing had she not been pale and trembling slightly from shock. "Oh, dear, given the trouble in town, I think Katsuki can't really be blamed," Bakugo Masaru said with a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. "Inko, how's Izuku?" He won't wake up," the greenette wailed. "Ahem." Toshinori coughed, drawing their attention. "As young Izuku only just awoke his quirk, I think it likely, given the stressful situation he found himself in and the amount of apparent power he used, that he is physically exhausted, at the very least." "All Might," Inko squeaked out, Mitsuki steadying her as she swayed in shock. "Indeed," Toshinori said with his customary heroic smile as he picked up the unconscious man who had threatened the boys. He had a hearty dislike for those who threatened children and hoped that they threw the book at the man. "I must away and take this Enudwell to police custody. Give my salutations to young Izuku when he wakes." Farewell. With a great leap, the #1 hero leapt into the sky towards the nearest police station. He also pulled out his phone and sent a text to a friend of his who was a quirk counselor and diagnosis expert. The power that the young Midoriya Izuku had shown needed to be expertly studied and the boy guided. The last thing they needed was another endeavor, after all. A week later. Izuku's room, Midoriya family apartment. Izuku sat on the floor of his room, writing furiously in a notebook that his mother had bought him. He had been unconscious for 2 days before waking up and finding himself in a hospital. His mother had, almost literally, cried up a storm when he'd woken up, which made the nurses wonder if her quirk was some kind of mutation quirk to do with ridiculously enhanced tear ducts rather than the minor gravity emitter type quirk that she had. The elder Bakugos had thanked him for protecting Katsuki, although the explosion quirk user himself protested that Izuku had been protecting himself, not him. After getting out of hospital the next day, Inko had taken him to a special quirk counselor that specialized in powerful and potentially dangerous quirks like his, one that she told him had offered his expertise due to All Might's recommendation. The fact that Izuku had only a faded memory of his idol, and no autograph, was something of a blow to him, but he resolved to one day have that added to his collection. Anyway, at the special center that the quirk counselor took him and his mother to, he had learned how to call upon his quirk, a mysterious silver fire that he could generate from any part of his body. The counselor had made him go through a whole battery of tests with it and had seemed fascinated by the results. Izuku's flame was quite unlike most flame quirks that the man had come across. Physically, the flames appeared more like a liquid than a flame, liquid silver or even mercury to be specific, yet still burned like a regular fire, just as hot as blue fire in fact. Even more interesting was that they seemed perfectly suited for countering other forms of fire. Much like what had happened with the Silver Dragon villain's fire, Izuku's fire would resist it due to its liquid properties and, in sufficient quantities, would smother and put out fire. The doctor had also called in a few quirk users with various forms of water liquid control as well as those with fire manipulation quirks to test and see how the strange liquid fire reacted to them. Surprisingly, neither group could exert any form of control over the strange substance, both claiming that the strange silver flame was unlike anything they'd encountered before. That had just been yesterday, and Izuku was a bit sad that he couldn't go back to the place again. There was so much he wanted to try out with his new quirk, but couldn't due to its volatile nature. Something else that he'd found out was that his quirk was strongly influenced by his emotions. When he was happy, calm, or otherwise in a positive mood, the flames seemed happy to come out and obey his commands, but if he was sad, depressed, or otherwise negative, the flames would either lash out or curl around him protectively without his conscious command. It meant he had to keep himself in control, or at least not depressed, but he was at an all-time high right now, so such a problem never occurred to him. Sitting up as he finished scribbling the last of what he knew about his own quirk down on the page of his new Hero Analysis for the Future notebook, Volume 1, Izuku nodded and closed it shut. His was the third quirk in the book, with his mother's and Kaken's quirks taking the first few pages up. I wonder why my quirk's so different from Dad's? He has to be where I got it from as he's a flame quirk user, but mine's a lot stronger than his flame breath is. Maybe one of his relatives has a much stronger flame quirk. Izuku thought, unknowingly muttering everything under his breath as he did so. Izuku, you're muttering again. His mother tapped him on the shoulder as she entered his room. Oh, oops. Sorry. He chuckled in embarrassment. Have you thought of a name for your quirk, Izuku? Inko asked as she knelt down and hugged her son. She loved him to pieces and was so glad that his quirk was strong enough to let him become a hero like he dreamed of being. The advisor man entered a temporary name of Liquid Fire into your quirk registry, but we can change it if you want, she continued. Kaken's given me a bunch of suggestions, but the only one I like the sound of is Villainous. Izuku pulled a face. It's Silver Tyrant. That's not yes, a bit too villainous. Inko's sweat dropped at the name. How about just Silver Flame? Okay, the boy said cheerfully. I think Kaken's gonna still call it Silver Tyrant though. Why does he like that name so much? Inko wondered. He says it's 'cause my fire kicks the butt of other fire quirks or something like that. Izuku informed his mother, sweat dropping at his friend's rough tone. Sounds like him. He's Mitsuki's boy after all. Inko sighed before smiling at her son. How does katsudon sound for dinner? Yeah, the smaller greenette cheered. Later that day. Office, All Might's Hero Agency, Roppongi, Minato Ward, Tokyo. We've finally managed to get some information back from Romania about who this idiot is. Sir Night Eye, All Might's sidekick, said to his boss as he gestured at the picture of the man who had almost killed Izuku and Katsuki. Lay it on me, Night Eye. Toshinori nodded. He wasn't putting on the loud booming act of All Might right now, relaxing as much as he could with his trusted sidekick. His name is Jan Kalicha, a Czech-Romanian-Japanese citizen. His mother was Romanian-Japanese, while his father was a Czech. The bespectacled hero adjusted his glasses. His quirk is known as Silver Balor, a transformation-type quirk that allows him to become a being greatly similar to the evil multi-headed dragon out of Romanian legend, hence the name. Mr. Kalicha was visiting his long-distance girlfriend when he discovered that she had been cheating on him and transformed out of anger. The woman escaped with her life and limbs intact. Her paramour, not so much. I can sympathize with him to some extent, but he deliberately tried to kill those children. The newly crowned symbol of peace scowled. That has to do with the mental aspect of the man's quirk. Night Eye replied. If he transforms out of his own will, he is in complete control of his form. Should he transform out of emotional overload, as he did last week, all of his darker impulses are given free rein. It is why he never attempted to become a pro-hero in Romania. So he secretly wished to take his anger out on others, which his dark side proceeded to try and carry out. Toshinori scowled again. While he couldn't blame the man for having an emotional episode after finding his girlfriend with another man, the consequences of that loss of control nearly cost 2 children their lives. Well, even taking this little factoid into account, he's almost certainly going to be convicted. Whether he'll be imprisoned or simply banned from the country is beyond me. So long as he doesn't try to kill any kids again, I don't especially care. Agreed. Night Eye nodded. He felt just as strongly about cowards who would harm children as All Might. That reminds me, a report came in from Matsushita-san about that boy who held Kalicha off. Toshinori held out a folder to Night Eye. It makes for very interesting reading. Hitching an eyebrow, the bespectacled man took the folder and proceeded to read it closely. When he finished, he was nodding slowly in agreement. The boy's flame is very curious indeed. Night Eye said slowly. It almost appears similar to some forms of magma-based quirks I've read on, or perhaps even a quirk I once read about that allows its user to produce napalm from their pores. But even then, a quirk that seemingly blends the natures of 2 opposing elements into an entirely new state is most unusual. It could be a particularly useful tool against other fire quirks or fires in general. If the boy becomes a hero, or even simply a firefighter, imagine how effective he could be at smothering forest fires and arson attacks. Toshinori mused thoughtfully. Also a possible way to stop Endeavor's increasingly large amounts of property damage. He could also be an excellent combatant. Night Eye agreed. His quirk is seemingly completely immune to interference from fire and liquid manipulation quirks. It's a shame Matsushita only had time for 4 days of testing, but that's more than what he usually allows. Midoriya Izuku's quirk must have truly caught his interest. Yes, the old codger is aloof, but if something catches his interest, he likes to investigate it. Toshinori nodded. Did you see the sheet regarding what he caught with his quirk? Night Eye nodded. Professor Matsushita Niji had the Insight quirk, a mental emitter-type quirk that could be used on any individual quirk once a year at most, but usually it gave the man information on a quirk that was important, such as a weakness, a flaw, or a consequence to using the quirk. I did. I have to wonder about why he neglected to tell the boy himself. Knowing old man Matsushita, he just forgot. The pro-hero snorted. I'll drop by the Midoriya home at some point in the next week or so and inform them about this little weakness that Matsushita discovered. Young Midoriya can't very well practice his quirk without knowing the one type of opponent he cannot use his quirk against well. Knowing one's limits and weaknesses is a wise stance. Night Eye agreed. Well, it's late and knowing you, you plan on a long patrol again tomorrow. Until he is taken care of, once and for all, I cannot rest. Toshinori said grimly, ire in his voice for the man who had killed all of his predecessors. Have a good night's sleep, Night-Eye. Chapter 2, Flame of the Silver Tyrant. 3 days later. Fire Training Room, Volatile Quirk Training Center, Muzudafu. H&D. Izuku grunted as he held his cupped hand out in front of him, the ball of liquid fire nestled against his palm shimmering and pulsing slightly as the young greenette tried to exert his control over it and bend the strange flame-like substance to his will. So far I've only been able to throw ball of fire and release bursts and streams of it. Izuku let out a short huff as he paused in his exercise, his lower lip working its way between his teeth as he tried to puzzle through how to exert more control over his quirk. For some flame quirks, that's the limit of what they're capable of, but there are just as many that can mold and even partially solidify their flames in some shape or form. I don't think Silver Tyrant is limited to something that simple. The fact that it acts more like a liquid than actual fire should make it easier to mold than actual fire. I just have to focus. Instead of trying to do both at once, maybe I should focus on it one step at a time. First shape the fire, then try and solidify it. He took a deep breath and then raised his hand and began to activate his quirk again, causing a small surge of liquid silver flame to emerge from his palm. As he did, a stray thought echoed in his mind. Good thing this room is fireproof. The room Izuku was practicing in was specially designed to handle intense heat and fire. Every surface or object in the room was made of heat-resistant and fire-resistant materials. There was extra venting and oxygen sensors to provide extra air into the room if the oxygen levels started fluctuating, and sprayers built into the walls would dispense chemicals to rapidly drop the temperature if the heat within ever approached a level dangerous to its occupants. Every population center nowadays had a special Volatile Quirk Training Center, VQTC, where children with particularly destructive and volatile quirks could practice and learn to control their ability to prevent them from accidentality causing a catastrophe. Granted, there were still quirks out there that even these kind of specialized training areas couldn't help. The Rescue Hero 13 and their Black Hole Quirk were prime examples. Children with those kinds of quirks were enrolled in a mentoring program, allowing retired or temporarily off-duty pro heroes to help guide them in learning to control their quirk. If that also meant that many children with such quirks would be inspired to follow a heroic path of their own, well, that was merely an unintended side effect and a boon for society either way. Shaking his head to clear it of the stray thoughts that teased and tormented him when he was trying to concentrate, Izuku refocused his mind and started to practice again. This time he'd try simply reshaping Silver Tyrant's flames into a new form, rather than trying to create a solid object. Closing his eyes, Izuku tried to focus on something he could easily imagine. Instantly, his mind went to a scene from a giant mecha anime he and Kaken had watched together recently, particularly the sword the hero's mecha had drawn in battle. It was so cool looking, Izuku could see it as clear as day. With a surge of focus, silver flames began to boil out of Izuku's extended palm. Super long, double-edged, spiky, fancy hilt. Izuku began to trace every detail in his mind, feeling the liquid fire shift and shimmer in response. Several minutes of repetition later, Izuku risked cracking his eyes open and gasped in delighted surprise. Floating an inch away from his palm was an exact replica of the sword, albeit adjusted to his size and formed from his silver fire. Now that right there is impressive, Midoriya-kun, his supervisor, Ikazuchi Gomen, offered with a smile. The man had the quirk Thunderball, an emitter type that let him form and fire spheres of condensed electrical energy at various outputs. He had once been a pro hero, the Thunder Hero, Issen, but had been forced to retire when a villain had damaged his leg to the point it had to be amputated at the knee. Now he worked as a guidance counselor at the VQTC, offering what help he could to youngsters trying to get a handle on their quirks. It takes a lot of focus to shape your quirk like that. Most kids your ages don't get farther than learning how to control their output by randomly blasting stuff with it until after the first year or so. Heck, it took me a couple of months just to learn I could control the size of my thunderballs. Izuku blushed deeply, preening ever so slightly at the praise. I just focus, sir. I think it's a bit easier for me since my quirk A acts more like a L liquid than normal fire. The former pro simply smiled and nodded. That might be true, but it's still darn impressive, kid, especially with you only having it active for a few days now. Just remember not to push yourself too hard too fast. Slow and steady wins the race. Practice and perfect everything you can with your quirk. Don't rush headlong through anything or else you might lose control. You've still got over a decade left before you can apply to a hero school after all. The boy had left no doubts about what he wanted to do in the future, and Gomen was more than willing to encourage that idea. Better firepower like that be on the side of the angels than out there raising hell. Yes, sir. Izuku nodded. Pushing himself up onto his prosthetic leg, Gomen checked his watch. Looks like it's about time for your mother to get here. Go and start getting yourself cleaned up and get some liquids into you. Fire quirks have a nasty side effect of raising your internal temperature and causing the body to dehydrate faster, even for the lucky ones like you that are actually immune to their quirk's effect. Suddenly realizing how dry his throat felt, Izuku happily nodded his agreement and hurried off to do as he was told. He still couldn't completely hold back the excited energy bustling through his body. He couldn't believe how lucky he was to have a quirk like his. He was going to be a great hero, just like All Might. After wiping off the sweat that had accumulated along his face and arms using a towel the nice nurse lady had provided and nearly draining a juice bottle, Izuku went to meet his mother in the VQTC's lobby, where the Midoriya matriarch was thanking Ikazuchi for taking care of her boy today. Think nothing of it. You've got a good boy there, Midoriya-san. Ikazuchi laughed genially. He's got a good head on his shoulders and knows how to work hard, just what you need if you want to master an elemental quirk. I've already sent a request to the quirk counseling office to get someone with a fire quirk closer to Izuku's own transferred here at least temporarily, but I'm afraid it's going to some time. You're left with me until then, and I'll do what I can, but I'm afraid Izuku's quirk is simply too different from mine to help that much. Thank you for your help and consideration. Inko offered the bemused ex-pro a short bow, before taking her son's hand and leading him out, smiling gently as she listed to him babbled cheerfully about what he'd accomplished with his quirk today. After she'd calmed down from the incident a few days ago, she'd been both relieved and overjoyed to see her son not only healthy and safe, but happy as well. He'd been worrying himself sick about his quirk since Katsuki's birthday 3 months ago, and it had only gotten worse after his own a month ago. While she'd have much preferred for it to have awakened under far less dangerous circumstances, it was still a relief to see it active and her boy so happy about it. Only now, new worries were starting to take the place of her old ones. Both Izuku and Katsuki wanted to be heroes, but Inko was worried. Being a pro hero was an extremely dangerous occupation, the pro they just left being a prime example of that. No mother wanted to imagine their child being maimed, or worse, but she also didn't want to interfere with her baby chasing after his dreams. Even more concerning were the small shifts she'd been seeing in Katsuki since he awoke his quirk. Katsuki had always had a high opinion of himself, though it was not entirely undeserved, and it had only been getting worse with all the praise everyone had been layering on him since his quirk activated. She knew Mitsuki was practically pulling her hair out as she tried to pop his ego before it got too bad, and she was scared that once word got out about his quirk, Izuku would be in for the same treatment. Arrogance in a profession as dangerous as heroics could be extremely dangerous. Believing you were bulletproof only worked if you actually were. Fortunately, a good way to help temper both boys' pride had come up a couple of days ago. Would be a treat for both the boys and, hopefully, a reminder of not to let their egos grow too far. Everything was set up for this weekend, which had been something of a minor miracle given the type of schedule their special guest had to keep to. I can't wait to see Izuku's face when he sees who our guest is, she thought warmly, smiling down at her son, her pride and joy. Her marriage with Hayashi had its bumps like any marriage, and his work in America had only increased those strains, even as he worked hard to support them. Still, when he'd found out that his son had developed a flame quirk, he'd over the moon with pride. He had promised to speak with his supervisors about transferring back to Japan, but his bosses were being stubborn and insistent that he remain in place as he was integral to the current team, or some such nonsense. Even if he wasn't here right now, Hisashi had still given her Izuku, A boy any mother would be proud of. He was worth every second of labor and every annoyance of PR Dinsui. She had never been able to understand mothers who would abuse or harm their own children. The thought of hurting her son was abhorrent to Inko. Banishing the dark thoughts, she instead started to plan out dinner. A homemaker's job was never done, after all. That weekend, Midoriya residence. Katsuki was frowning in a mix of annoyance and confusion as he looked around the apartment. It wasn't unusual for him or even his whole family to join Auntie Inko and Izuku for dinner. Heck, it was rare if it didn't happen at least once a week. The old hag said it was to make sure Auntie didn't get lonely with Hisashi out working abroad, but Katsuki suspected that it was just an excuse so his mother could get out of cooking herself. Auntie Inko was a far better cook anyway, so Katsuki wasn't going to complain. However, the way the adults had been acting all day had been grating on his nerves something fierce. His mother had been giving off an I know something you don't know vibe for the past couple days, and it had only got worse as they headed over to the Midoriyas. Katsuki knew that there was some ulterior motive to this dinner outside of scoring a free meal. Yes, he knew what an ulterior motive was: screw off and explode. Izuku hadn't noticed it yet, of course. Katsuki had to resist rolling his eyes at his friend's naive trust. Izuku might not be an idiot, but he was stupidly trusting, particularly when it came to adults. Granted, part of that was likely because Auntie Inko was one of the most genuinely nice people Katsuki had ever seen, and she'd skewered his perceptions more than a bit. The fact that she was involved in this as well likely meant that whatever the adults were planning was truly something that adults thought they were going to enjoy or simply needed. That realization did absolutely nothing to assuage the aggressive boy's fading patience. "Oi, old hag, what the heck has got you acting like you and the old man just won a two-person onsen weekend?" he asked bluntly. For Katsuki, that was actually pretty polite. "Watch your goddamned mouth, brat." Mitsuki snapped back. Since she hadn't used any four-letter expletives, Bakugo Mitsuki also seemed to be acting on her best behavior as well. "Sit your rear end down and just wait. Trust me, something good's going to happen tonight." Katsuki was now officially intrigued. His mother would threaten a dire fate on him if he ever stepped out of line, or trick him into eating the foods he hated, but she never outright lied to him. Sitting back and letting a thoughtful frown replace his burgeoning scowl, he almost missed the way Auntie Inko kept glancing at the clock, which was almost at 3. So, it was something at 3, probably a guest. What, was Deku's waste of space dad finally going to show up or something? 2 minutes later, Katsuki had his answer. "Ah!" A familiar heroic voice boomed from the door of the Midoriya apartment. As soon as the clock struck 3, Izuku and Katsuki boggled at one another. There was, likely very literally, no one on Earth who didn't recognize that bombastic, confident, and loud laugh. "No freaking way," Katsuki whispered as Auntie Inko went to open the door. Izuku was silent and wide-eyed in awe. Seconds later, Inko returned to the room, standing aside to let their guest into the room. "I am here. Coming through the door like a hero," All Might announced as he strode in, his iconic heroic smile, TM, firmly in place. "They all Might?" Izuku stuttered in shock and excitement. "Indeed. It is good to see that you recovered well from that nasty incident a few weeks back." Young Midoriya, the #1 pro hero, boomed. "It is also good to see you as well, young Bakugo." "Yo," Katsuki said, trying to play it cool, that which would have been easier if he hadn't squeaked like he'd had a lungful of helium. "Damn it. Do you want a cup of tea or something, All Might?" Inko offered genteelly. "I certainly wouldn't think of refusing, Midoriya-san," the hero assured her. Once he was seated and had a cup in hand, it looked ridiculously dainty in his massive hands. The man took a sip and got down to business. "Delicious. Now, I have come here to inform you, young Midoriya, of a weakness that your quirk possesses," All Might said gravely. "My good friend Dr. Matsushita seems to have forgotten to mention it before he departed, so I have taken it upon myself to pass the information on in his stead." "A weakness? You mean like how it goes out of control if I get really angry or sad?" Izuku asked, barely managing to suppress his inner fanboy enough to let his quirk otaku side take over. "In a manner of speaking, young man," the pro said with a nod. You see, my good friend Matsushita has a rather useful quirk known as insight. Using it, he can gain knowledge of a limitation or weakness of any given quirk so long as he can see the holder of it with his own two eyes. It only works on any given quirk once a year, but it is, you'll agree, a fairly useful one for pro heroes or even aspiring pro heroes. Nodding eagerly, Izuku waited for his idol to speak more. Your quirk is especially powerful against other forms of fire and is even resistant to fire's normal weakness, water, but it apparently has one large elemental weakness, ice. All Might stated seriously. Apparently, your fire quirk can be frozen by even a moderately powerful ice quirk, rendering them incapable of actually burning anything, though I've been led to believe that you will at least retain control of it in this state. Fire. You can freeze? Katsuki blinked. That sounded utterly ridiculous on the face of it, but this was All Might. The number one hero had no reason to lie about this kind of thing, so it had to be true. Actually, his own quirk was kind of similar. Explosion altered the makeup of his sweat to something similar to nitroglycerin, and thus if he couldn't sweat normally or if his sweat was frozen, his quirk would be extremely limited. Indeed, young Bakugo. All Might nodded at him. Matsushita explained it to me, but a lot of the science and whatnot goes a bit over my head. It has something to do with the dual-state mixture of fire and water that is present in the fire produced by young Midoriya. Something in the interaction makes the flames a perfect counter to most types of fire, including those made by fire quirks, but the trade-off seems to make water's ability to change from a liquid to a solid far, far more pronounced. Oh dear, Inko said with a concerned look. Wouldn't that mean temperature quirks would work as well, if someone could lower it enough? Indeed, but on a far lesser scale. Temperature quirks generally have a very limited area of effect, which means that the amount of fire your sun can produce can counter most of them. The pro assured her. Attempting to freeze young Midoriya's flames with your average temperature quirk would be like using an electric fan to cool the Sahara Desert, for comparison's sake. Well, at least the kid doesn't have some weak sauce weakness that everyone and his grandma could use. Mitsuki commented with a shrug. Last I checked, ice quirks were a lot less common than fire quirks. The kid's just gotta avoid snowy mountains and keep an eye on the weather forecast in the winter and he'll still turn out to be a kick-butt hero. All Might's sweat dropped at the somewhat crass way of speaking, and even more at the total non-reaction that it received from those present. Evidently this was Bakugo Mitsuki's normal way of talking. Ahem. Yes, well, that was the main reason I came here, he said before taking another gulp of his tea. Really, it was rather good, and turning back to the boys. I have been told that you both aspire to one day attend my old alma mater, UA High. Is that right? Weiss. I want to be a hero like you, All Might. Izuku declared. And I'm gonna be even better. Agreed Katsuki confidently. Even in the face of his idol, Katsuki was a boy of strong ambition. Glad to hear it, agreed the blonde behemoth with a booming laugh. I'm sure you'll both grow into excellent heroes one day. Please, allow this old pro to offer the next generation some advice. Do not let the words of others influence who you are as you continue to grow and train with your quirks. Huh. Katsuki sounded confused. All Might sighed, rotating the teacup gently cradled in his massive hands. It is a sad truth about life that there will always be those who will grow jealous of others' good fortune, he explained. I know that both of you were lucky enough to be born with powerful quirks, but many are not so blessed. Those born with quirks that are not as naturally powerful and who lack the physical and/or mental fortitude to train their own quirk will instead grow jealous and try to lash out at you both. Some will use any excuse to try and tear you down, to make you feel small so that they do not feel weak in comparison. Others will instead try and latch onto you as you grow, trying to rely on your gifts as if they were their own. They will fill your heads with praise and bloat your ego, just so that they can use your own strength to make themselves feel stronger. You must learn not to let either affect you. Take words of praise and accolades only when you feel they are justly earned. Accept failure when it happens and learn to grow from it. Take criticism from those you trust and those with knowledge to help guide you, but do not let it break you. Do these things, train with all you can, and keep a heroic ideal in your here, and one day I'll be honored to fight alongside the two of you. Inko and Mitsuki kept a careful eye on both their boys as they took in and tried to digest the pro's words of caution, and both could barely hold down their smiles. When the number 1 hero had called to arrange a meeting to hand over the information about Izuku's quirk, he'd been more than happy to help with Operation Ego Popper, as Mitsuki called it. Getting Katsuki to listen about ignoring praise was always going to be an uphill battle, but with All Might involved, that hill just got a whole lot smaller. Izuku was the opposite. He'd easily listen to his mother about the dangers of false praise. He was a humble boy, but the boy could be one of his own worst critics at times. Getting All Might to talk to him about ignoring those who'd try and knock him down, however, should help shore him up against that particular threat. Both boys had confidence problems, if only on opposite sides of the spectrum, and both were solved with a single speech. Never underestimate what the scheming of determined mothers could accomplish. After a few more minutes, during which both mothers took pictures of their sons sitting on either side of the number 1 hero and All Might signed Izuku's notebook, the hero had to bid the two families farewell. He had more meetings to get to amidst all of his crime fighting. All Might, thank you so much for agreeing to my selfish request, Inko said as she escorted the hero out of the house. Ha! It is a hero's job to encourage the next generation to be better heroes. The man laughed boisterously. Especially when they have such powerful quirks. It may sound trite, cliched, or even simply cheesy, but with great power comes great responsibility. It is something that I think more than a few heroes nowadays could stand to remember. Like Endeavor, the Midoriya matriarch sighed. I saw the news the other day, over 2 million yen in property damage from one fight. Indeed. You need not fear that your son will follow Endeavor in his rash behavior. All Might said diplomatically, stifling the urge to expound upon the number of issues he had with the Flame Hero's personal failings as a hero. Young Midoriya strikes me to be an even-tempered and cautious individual. He will undoubtedly exercise great caution with his abilities. Thank you. Inko sniffed. Be safe in your heroics, All Might. Wah. Have no fear. Justice shall prevail. All Might flexed slightly before leaving down the stairs and then leaping away heroically. No point damaging property. Needlessly, after all, after the very shocking meeting with All Might, both Izuku and Katsuki were left to their own devices in the room of the former while the two mothers worked on cooking dinner, with Bakugo Masaru coming over later to join in. Izuku generated a small ball of silvery liquid fire in his hand and looked at it, now aware that his quirk had a serious weakness to it aside from being affected by his moods. Honestly, a quirk being affected by its owner's emotions was hardly a rare thing. Most quirks tended to be at least partially linked to their owner's mental or emotional state. Izuku's was simply a more dangerous extension of that. He'd simply need to learn to control and rein in his emotions as best he could. The one time that a nurse at Dr. Matsushida's research center had startled him, he'd been instantly surrounded by a corona of silver flames, almost burning the poor woman. Had she not had a minor mutation-based quirk called Cat's Eye that increased her reflexes to that of a cat's own, he could have easily given the poor woman several severe burns. A specific elemental weakness is different though, it changes a lot about how I'll have to handle things, the Greenette thought morosely. My quirk will be next to useless to winter if a stray snowflake can cause it to freeze up, and there are plenty of people with ice quirks. The ones who become villains will likely have stronger quirks, so if I do meet an ice quirk using villain, I'll lose in an instant and dash. Damn it, Izuku, will you stop with the mumbling already? Katsuki bopped his friend over the head. Izuku was his best friend, and he'd gotten used to most of his habits, but that crazed muttering thing got real creepy, real fast if he let it build up any steam. Not to mention it was DMN irritating. Sorry, Kaken. Izuku offered apologetically. It's just a lot to take in. You aren't the only one who has a weakness to the cold, dumbass. The blonde boy snapped back, easily reading his friend's thoughts. The idiot had the ego of a soggy sugar cube sometimes. My explosion works like crap in the cold and wet too, you know. But it isn't totally useless like mine in the cold, the fire quirk user countered. I mean, I can maybe still float the frozen fire, but that's why you have that tutor of yours at the VQTC, idiot. Katsuki snorted. Get him to call in an ice quirk user to help so you can practice what you can do if someone flash freezes your flames. Who knows, maybe your frozen fire can still blow sheet up, or you can manipulate and throw it around like a telekinetic to bash a bad guy's head in. We're still only 4, you dumbass. We don't start UA until we're 15. That's more than enough time for a quirk nerd like you and a genius like me to figure out ways to turn our weaknesses into something we can use. Now man up and start acting like my future sidekick already, damn it. Lord Explosion Murder and the Silver Tyrant are going to kick butt, and no dinky ice is going to stop us. Kaken, Izuku said with wide teary eyes, making the other boy scowl and look away. Yeah. Katsuki grumbled. He hated it when his friend got all mushy like this. Boys, dinner's ready. Inko called from the kitchen. Extinguishing his fireball, Izuku leapt up and ran from the room. He loved it when his and Kaken's mother worked together to cook dinner. It was always nice, although he was glad that his portions mostly lacked the explosive heat that Kaken liked. A little went a long way regarding skis in the young Midoriya's opinion. Hey, wait up! Katsuki yelped as he scrambled after his friend. No fair running, Izuku. The next week, Fire Training Room, Volatile Quirk Training Center. Weak to ice, you say? Gomen raised an eyebrow. The former hero looked down at Izuku, one finger thoughtfully tapping the metal leg that replaced the missing limb. Why yes sir. That's what All Might said Dr. Matsushida's quirk told him. The young boy said with a jerky nod. Matsushida, huh? Heard of him, the man's supposed to be the best when it comes to analyzing quirks for weaknesses. If anyone could tell, it would be him, the one-legged man mused. Fortunately, we do have an ice quirk user available. She's the Frost heroine, Cold Front. She's on temporary leave from having a baby, so she's on light duties and is volunteering here until she's ready to head back to the streets. Wait here for a moment and I'll see if she's free to help us out. No more than 2 minutes later, Gomen was back, with a woman in an ice blue suit, decorated with white snowflakes. She wore a domino mask that seemed more for fashion than for concealing her identity. Her hair was pure white, with a single lock of ice blue falling loose over her face. Her dark blue eyes glinted with humor and experience. So you're the kid who has a fire that's weak to ice, hmm? She asked with a gentle smile. Weiss, ma'am. Izuku squeaked. Just Cold Front is fine, dear. I may be a mother now, but I'm still only 23, she said, jokingly chiding. Now, create a small ball of fire and float it over to the other side of the room if you can. Okay. The boy nodded and did as instructed. Fascinating that it almost looks like a quirk I saw that allowed its owner to turn his limbs into molten metal, but I've never seen a flame that moves and acts like a liquid before. Cold Front mused thoughtfully as she studied the orb of rippling liquid fire respectfully for a moment. Okay, I'll start with a low-powered blast just to see how it reacts. Raising a single finger, the heroine shot a beam of pure cryogenic energy at the flame, deliberately holding back and aiming to barely clip the fireball. Still, the slight touch seemed to be all that was needed to turn the liquid fire into a block of flame-shaped ice. Surprisingly, the frozen flame didn't fall like she'd been half expecting, merely bobbing in the air slightly. Oh-wee! Izuku winched. The fire felt different now. It was heavier, harder to keep afloat and felt slippery, like he could barely keep a hold of it. Strangely, he didn't feel the slight draining sensation that kept the flames burning anymore. It was just there. The unfamiliar strain of keeping it afloat was a bit painful though, like using an entirely different muscle, and it was giving him a small headache. How does that feel, Midoriya-kun? Cold Front asked curiously. It's not weird, he answered, trying to put what he was feeling into words. I'm not maintaining it anymore, but it's still there. It's a lot harder to keep it floating too, but it feels so different. So you're straining but not much, she summed up. Well, that's likely due to the fact your quirk normally deals with something acting as a liquid energy state, but now it's being forced to deal with something in a liquid solid state. One part of the flame's properties has drastically changed, so it isn't much of a surprise you're feeling a bit of strain. I guess. Izuku frowned. This is going to take a lot of training to get used to, isn't it? Although phrased as a question, it was more of a statement than anything else. Smart kid. Cold Front nodded with a smile. Any quirk with an aspect which is either pinpoint or rarely used is like a muscle. You need to exercise it in order to strengthen it. Sometimes you even find something that can be useful for the rest of your quirk that way. Ready to go on? Nodded firmly, determination lit up the boy's face. You bet I am. How did I think that this is going to be a fun recovery PRD for me? The Frost Heroine said with a smirk. Okay, Midoriya-kun. Let's get started. Chapter 3, Grown Flames. 10 years later. Third-year classroom, Aldra Junior High, Muzutafa Town. But why bother? You all want to be heroes, right? Midoriya Izuku merely rolled his eyes as the majority of his classmates began cheering and shouting raucously, most showing off their quirks as they did so. He personally refrained from both activities for several reasons. The most logical being that activating his quirk would likely set off the oversensitive fire alarms Aldra had received shortly after he and Kaken had started. A standard precaution for when a school had not one but two students with extremely volatile quirks. The more personal reason was Izuku's extreme distaste for the attitude that seemed to permeate the entire school. Aldra had proven itself to have a particularly quirkist mindset, with most of teaching staff treating the increasingly rare quirkless student with dismissal, an attitude that emboldened several of the worst of the school's population. The Verdette had very firmly put his foot down when he'd found out about that. Oi teach, don't put me and Izuku on the same level as this bunch of reject background characters. Bakugo Katsuki scoffed loudly from his seat next to his childhood friend, legs casually kicked up and resting on his desk. We're the next top two heroes after all. If any of these scrubs could even hope to make it out of the minor leagues, I'll be fucking surprised. Izuku couldn't help but roll his eyes again. Some things never changed. The rest of the class was far less blasé about Katsuki's little declaration. Dining you, Bakugo. Who do you think you are? You're not that great. You looking down on us? Yeah, I am. Any of you worthless scrubs want to argue my point? The blonde explosion user returned the indignant shouts with a feral sneer, absently sitting up and raising one hand and threateningly making the claw gesture he usually made before setting off an explosion. That one gesture was all it took to make the rest of the class shrink back, most losing any trace of defiance. Bakugo and Midoriya were the undisputed kings of Aldra Junior High. No one in the entire school had a quirk that could match either Explosion or Silver Tyrant's Flame when it came to power, versatility, or the skill either boy showed in their use. Not even the teachers had anything close to an ability that could challenge the two teens. The former rulers of the school had attempted to assert their dominance shortly after the duo had become first years, ambushing both 12-year-olds after classes were over on their third day. The third years, 10 of them in total, had been soundly beaten without landing so much as a scratch on either preteen. Bakugo had been heard loudly complaining that the fight hadn't even counted as a proper warm-up as they left. Bakugo spat off a scoff before relaxing back into his seat. That's what I thought. Kaken. Izuku gave his best friend a long look, a note of censure in his tone. Yeah, I know. Katsuki waved the scolding off, before offering Izuku an unamused glower. And what have I told you about using that DMN nickname? Stop it. Sorry. The flame wielder responded absently. As the class settled back down, Izuku absently settled into his own seat, ignoring the teachers blathering in favor of filling out the form that had been waiting on their desks when class started. It was obvious where he intended to go, the school that had produced some of the best and most upstanding heroes in the country. They regularly had more alumni in the top 100 than Shiketsu and Ketsubutsu, its most well-known rival schools in Japan, put together. Ever since their visit from All Might shortly after his own quirk had awakened, Izuku had been working tirelessly at the Volatile Quirk Training Center whenever he'd had the opportunity, to the point that his mother and mentor at the center had had to force him to take rest days to keep him from overworking himself. The quirk training allowance that his mother received to help subsidize the costs of having a child with such a potentially dangerous quirk had paid for his training, relieving some of the pressure from his mother's part-time jobs. He had bled, he had sweated, and he had cried during his training, but the enormous strides he'd made in controlling his silver flames were well worth the efforts in his mind. Now it was only ice wielders that could shake his confidence in his abilities, and even then he'd worked tirelessly to develop counters and ways to mitigate his quirk's glaring weakness. They weren't perfect, not yet, but Izuku was at least confident he wouldn't be helpless in the face of his natural nemesis. Katsuki hadn't been idle either. The blonde dynamo had worked just as hard beside his best friend, never willing to allow Izuku to get a step ahead of him. Their occasional sparring matches at the VQTC normally ended with the main sparring area utterly devastated before the match could be settled. Powerful explosions clashing with tides of silver fire overwhelming the center's ability to contain and control the damage. Socially, things were a bit dicier. Thanks to All Might's talk, both Izuku and Katsuki had been mostly prepared for the wave of sycophants, brown-nosers and other hangers-on that had tried to surround them since junior high had started. The fawning and bootlicking from the teaching staff had been a surprise, but one that the two had eventually left. Both teens more disturbed annoyed than anything else. It had taken the majority of their first year in Aldra to get the message across, but the rest of the school had eventually gotten it into their heads that trying to get close to the duo in an attempt to bask in the reflected glory was a quick way to ensure a cold shoulder from both. The end result was that the duo had found themselves mostly left alone by their peers and teachers outside of schoolwork and similar requirements. Honestly, that had suited both boys just fine. Both were exceptionally driven young men, and none of their peers seemed willing to even attempt to keep up with their friendly competitions. Those that had tried usually ended up being little more than a distraction at best, nuisances at worst. Katsuki had honestly been tempted to recruit a couple to just act as gophers for the two of them, but Aunt Mitsuki's gentle admonishments had knocked the idea out of his head while reminding him of the advice All Might had given them, which always worked wonders. Katsuki might hide it far better than Izuku, but he was just as much a fanboy for the symbol of peace as his best friend was. And just as All Might had warned, without an ability to bask in the reflected glory, the awe their classmates had previously shown quickly started to turn to jealousy and spite. The hateful words, snide remarks, and nasty rumors had started getting really bad shortly after their second year had started, with the staff mostly ignoring any reports if they weren't directly witnessing the events in questions. They had come to deeply regret that when two furious mothers had descended upon the school and giving the now ex-principal an hour-long rant on what would happen if he continued to passively encourage bullying at his school, just because my butt hat of a son and his friend are too FNG smart to let your butt-kissing staff get any kind of FNG reflected goddamned glory by association, as Bakugo Mitsuki had put it. Izuku felt the corners of his lips twitch in amusement as he remembered how the teachers had started looking at him and Katsuki like there were demons hiding behind their back after that. He knew it wasn't very heroic, but the Quirkus jerks had needed a good dose of maternal fury, and by All Might had they gotten it. As the bell toned, signaling the end of classes for the day, Izuku couldn't hold in a relieved sigh. In addition to the substandard staff and attitude, Aldra's academic challenge was, to be completely frank, an utter joke. If hero schools had allowed early admittance, he didn't doubt that he and Katsuki could have tested out early rather than stay for their third year of junior high. Maybe he was exaggerating slightly, but certainly not by much. Man, I can't wait until we're done with this FNG place. Katsuki grunted out as he and Izuku walked out the school gates. Having to deal with the background characters is bad enough, but those FING brown-nosers they call teachers are starting to turn into a real FING pain in the butt. Just think of it as training for dealing with the press. Izuku suggested absently as he thumbed through one of his notebooks. You know how far some reporters will go to try and get a story. Just look at what happened to Strong Arm last month. The blonde bomber snorted in amusement at that. The over-muscled ape that called himself the power hero, Strong Arm, had been a former up-and-comer who'd managed to make into the top 100 in only his third year after graduating. Then a blonde bimbo of a reporter had fluttered her eyebrows at him and the dumbass had started bragging about his personal conquests, only to be shocked when everything he'd said was plastered across the morning edition for the next few weeks. Now it would take years for him to rebuild his rep after the scandal, if he ever could. What a moron. It didn't take long before two reached the points where they had to go their separate ways in order to reach their respective homes. Katsuki to his family's house, and Izuku to his. The Midoriya family had moved out of the apartment that Izuku had lived in when his father moved back from America. Midoriya Hisashi was now a branch office supervisor at the textiles company he worked for. He had initially taken a small hit to his paycheck when he started at a lower position, but he had worked himself hard to climb back up and support his family. "I'm home," Izuku called as he entered the front door. "Welcome home, Izuku," Inko said as she bustled out of the kitchen to give him a hug. The Midoriya matriarch had remained mostly unchanged through the years, the only real change being the occasional bout of exhaustion and fatigue that sometimes came over her. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said as she led her son to the joint kitchen dining room. "How was school?" "Better. Honestly, pretty boring for the most part," Izuku responded with a slight grimace as he sat at the table. "Some of the teachers are still trying their stupid brown-nosing tactics, but it's honestly just a nuisance these days." "Still? Honestly, some people just refuse to learn, don't they?" the green-haired matriarch offered with a slight frown. "It's no big deal. They're just going to end up disappointed either way, so it's best to just ignore them," the young fire user said with a shrug. "By the way, is Dad going to be home for dinner tonight?" "Afraid not, sweetie. He was selected to act as the company's representative at a business conference tomorrow." Inko responded with a sigh of her own. "He'll be gone for a couple of weeks at least, and I'm afraid he can't get out of this one. He's at the office right now, making sure everything will be handled by his subordinates while he's out." "Again? Why do they always pick Dad for these things?" Izuku grumbled. Honestly, Izuku understood exactly why. His father was an utter professional when it came to his work, competent, composed, and hard-working to the extreme. Not to mention loyal and law-abiding. More and more people these days weren't above cutting corners or taking bribes to overlook irregularities. This was especially true for a company that worked with such large corporations like the Yayoro Zuhiro Support Company and Shield Support Industries in America like his father's company did. In that kind of environment, a man with a reputation like Hisashi's was worth his weight in gold. Meaning he was always a first pick for any major project or meeting. The fact it left him overworked and away from his family for long stretches of time was a cost the company was willing to pay. Inko gave her son a sympathetic smile as she cooked. Izuku and his father had truly gotten close again once he started to be more than a voice over the phone, and the father-son bond between them was truly something heartwarming for her to watch. Neither of the men in her life were happy when Hisashi got dragged into these long-term projects, but it couldn't be helped sometimes. "Oh, that reminds me. Ikazuchi-san called earlier today." She suddenly remembered. "He said he's going to be handing you over to your new trainer next week." Izuku's face scrunched slightly at that. Ikazuchi Gomen had been his personal mentor at the Muzutafu Volatile Quirk Training Center for a decade now, and the two had developed an almost familial rapport. Sadly, Isen's health had been taking a turn for the worse lately, and he'd be retiring permanently within the next few months. Something about a chest injury that he'd taken before he'd lost his leg. The Frost heroine, Cold Front, still stopped by every now and again to help him work with developing counters for his quirk's weakness, and he'd had a few other temporary trainers over the years, but Ikazuchi had been the one who'd helped guide him the most. So, the fact that this might be his final handover with the man was a sad moment for Izuku. "He say anything about who my new trainer will be?" he asked aloud after a moment. "Sorry, honey, he just said that you'd be excited to meet them." Inko replied with a shake of her head. "I think he's planning another of his surprises. He certainly sounded excited about it himself." "Yeah, he's always enjoyed making me jump," Izuku said with a fond shake of his head. "Well, at least I don't have any homework tonight. I finished it all during class today and handed it in before we left." "I'll bet the teacher didn't enjoy that," Inko offered with a smirk. She was oh so proud of her brilliant baby boy, and she honestly wished that she and Mitsuki had been able to send their boys to a better school. Neither Izuku or Katsuki were being remotely challenged by Aldra, and the teachers were several things that she'd prefer not to call people in polite company. Still, Izuku hadn't allowed anything to dampen his dream to become a pro hero, and the first step to that for him was attending UA High School. She wasn't worried about him passing the academic exam. He self-studied enough that she was confident in his abilities there, But the practicals were an entirely different story. Outside of the occasional spar with Mitsuki's son, and that awful incident which had awakened his quirk in the first place, Izuku had never used his quirk to attack anyone or anything, static targets aside. It was something for him to work on this year, she supposed. Izuku, meanwhile, had turned on the television and was eagerly watching footage of All Might punching a villain with some kind of sludge mutation quirk. She noted that it was happening live and was just thankful that her son hadn't been drawn into that kind of mess. The next week, Staff Room, Muzutafu Volatile Quirk Training Center. Kamiji Mo, better known as the pro-hero Burnin, forcefully repressed the urge to scratch at the cast covering her left forearm and hand. Instead, she once again began to mentally curse the dumbass villain with that FING transparency quirk and a goddamned crowbar that had broken her wrist and forearm in 3 places. She'd scorched the creep something fierce for it and arrested his butt, but she was still officially stuck on light duties until she fully healed. So instead of having her stuck doing office work, which she both hated and SEK'd at, her boss, the flame hero, Endeavor, had temporarily assigned her to take up a temporary post at a VQTC as a PR assignment. Honestly, it was probably more to keep her from going stir-crazy and annoying the shit out of him and the rest of the flaming sidekickers. And now I'm stuck teaching some snot-nosed brats how not to scorch themselves with their own quirk. Fun, she thought sarcastically. At least it beats doing paperwork all day, if barely. She really wasn't really the type to normally get all moody and sheet. Instead, she honestly tried to live up to her hero name as a passionate, outgoing hero. But she honestly preferred working with professionals or at least people who knew how to actually work properly. She'd had to deal with far too many incompetent morons who'd thought that having a powerful or flashy quirk was all it took back when she was a hero student, and the experience, not to mention the injuries she'd had to suffer through because of said morons, had left her with a severe distaste for anyone without a proper appreciation for control of their quirk. Like most of the brats that attended facilities like this and thought just throwing their quirks around would make them the next All Might. The sound of the door sliding open pulled her from her thoughts, and she got a good look at the tired-looking old-timer wearing the VQTC's tracksuit uniform stumping into the room, his prosthetic leg thunking hollowly as he walked. The sight of him was a sobering one for Burnin. The Thunder Hero, Issen, had been, if not a legend, then a well-known and respected example of the type of hero children could aspire to be like when she was just a brat. Instead of having an overwhelming powerful quirk like All Might or Endeavor, he'd instead earned his spot into the top 10 with just a simple elemental quirk, hard work, training, and d'espion. There were still a lot of people who remembered the man who'd clawed his way to the number 8 position with nothing but grit, determination, and a quirk most wouldn't have expected to see in the top 100, let alone the top. He still had a bit of a cult following among those with electricity-based quirks. Sorry for running a bit late, this old body ain't as spry as it used to be. Ikazuchi Gomen apologized absently as he sat down opposite her. You'd be Burnin, I take it? Yup, that's me. Nice to meet you in person, Issen. The sidekick replied with a friendly grin, deciding to put her best foot forward here and getting straight to business. I've been told I'll be taking over one of your kids while I'm here. So, what am I going to be dealing with? You'll be taking over Izuku Midoriya's case. I guess you could call him my pet project since he first came to the VQTC a near decade ago, the old pro offered with a fond smile. He's a good kid with a heart of gold, smart as a razor, a work ethic that'd make a drill sergeant weep in joy, and a demed powerful quirk that'd give that boss of yours a run for his money. Really? Kid sounds too good to be true. Burnin offered, sounding skeptical. Kids, particularly those with powerful quirks, tended to be rude, arrogant little buggers. Same as her when she was a brat, really. So, I take it his quirk's a fire-based one then? There's the tricky bit. While Izuku's quirk is technically classified as a fire quirk, it's actually closer to some form of elemental composite quirk. Issen offered with a smirk. It's called Silver Tyrant's Flame, and it's a flame manifestation and manipulation quirk that works almost as an antithesis to other fire-type quirks. The flames he manifests are not only silver-colored but also show properties more akin to a liquid-type quirk than a fire-type. They give off the same heat and energy as normal flames, but possessed the fluidity and flame-smothering abilities of water. That last fact caused Vernon to nearly bolt up out of her chair. "Wait a minute," she gaped at the old man. "Are you saying that his flames can extinguish most any other type of fire, whether it's quirk-generated or natural?" The old pro finished with a nod. More than that, he's learned to actually use other flames as a fuel source for his own, letting him conquer them, as a friend of his once put it. That little trick is what convinced him to officially have his quirk relabeled from simply Silver Flame. Can't say it's not applicable either. Point of fact is, even if someone like you or Endeavor tried to use their quirk against Izuku-kun, all they'd be doing is making him stronger. That image made Vernon gulp a bit. No pro liked the thought of someone being able to completely no-sell their quirk. The very idea of her boss's signature Kaku Shikaneken, Flash Fire Fist, being not only quenched but absorbed by this kid's quirk was simply mind-boggling. Endeavor hadn't held the position as the number 2 hero for the better part of 2 decades without reason. Her boss was a veteran fighter with an extremely powerful quirk. She'd seen him use Hellflame to defeat even those who should have been a natural counter to his quirk, from water quirk users, to flame controllers, to even those whose quirks should have made them utterly fireproof. There had only been a few cases in her entire time as a flaming sidekicker that she'd seen them do more than annoy her boss, and only 1 or 2 that had ever forced the flame hero to fall back for any amount of time. "That sounds fucking crazy," she muttered aloud before shaking her head and getting back on topic. She could brood later. And what exactly can he do with these flames of his? How good is the kid's control? "Oh, he's been working on his control for nearly as long as I've been working with him, and I can say that he's gotten pretty dang good at it." Issen chuckled. "He's managed to figure out how to release his flames from any point of his body, and he's good enough to not only shape his flames into constructs, but condense and at least partially solidify them as well. Like I said, boy's got one hell of a work ethic, and his quirk itself is nothing to sneeze at either." "Dang," the sidekick hissed out, drawing out the word. She could respect that kind of work ethic. "Kid sounds like some kind of monster," she stated approvingly. "Oh, he's still got some flaws that need ironing out," the retired pro offered with a light shake of his head. "One of the biggest things I'm hoping you'll be able to help the lad with is that he tends to be a bit overly cautious, particularly when it comes to causing collateral damage. As far as his quirk itself, he still suffers from the most common quirk issue for fire quirk users. Overusing his quirk rapidly dehydrates him, though he's worked to build up his endurance and resistance to that. In addition, there's 2 real weaknesses that I've keyed onto when it comes to Silver Tyrant Flames. First, it has a naturally strong empathic link to Izuku's emotions, particularly his negative ones like anger or sadness. If Izuku loses control of his emotions, it'll instinctively lash out at whatever is causing him distress, almost like a natural defense. That's not particularly rare when it comes to flame quirks. Mo thought absently. Remember how her own blazing hair would flare up uncontrollably when her emotions got the better of her back when she was a teen. The second has to do with its liquid qualities. Because of this, Izuku's flames are as vulnerable to ice quirks as any water quirk, perhaps even weaker. Gomen finished. "Ice?" Vernon questioned flatly, not quite sure she'd heard him right. "You're saying this monstrously strong fire quirk is vulnerable to ice?" Dr. Matsushida's insight quirk has already taken a look at it. He's confirmed that, due to the liquid nature of the flames, Silver Tyrant's flame is unusually vulnerable to cold. Issen replied patiently, having obviously been expecting the disbelief. Even a moderately powerful ice quirk can quickly freeze Izuku-kun's flame solid. One of our usual volunteers, the Frost Heroine, Coldfront, has been working on and off with Izuku-kun to try and develop counters for it for nearly as long as I've been working with him, and we've literally got hours worth of recordings on the subject. Oddly enough, even when the flames are frozen, Izuku-kun can still sense, manipulate, and control them telekinetically as if his quirk were cryokinetic, though the effort required is several times more intense than simply controlling his liquid flames. Mo had, of course, heard of Dr. Matsushida before. He was widely regarded as one of the foremost quirk analysts and researchers in the world. Endeavor had personally hired the man several times over the years to get a better understanding of how his subordinates, and even his children's, quirks worked. Vernon reluctantly conceded that Issen wasn't bullshitting her on this one. "I think I might be in a bit over my head on this one," she admitted. "I'm not sure what I can help him. His quirk sounds like it's on a whole other level than mine. My Thunderball isn't exactly a close match for his either, girl," the retired pro reminded her dryly. "And I like to think I've done fairly well over the last decade with just what I've been able to gather from fire quirk users I've either worked with or fought against during my career. As a fire user yourself, I don't doubt that there's got to be dozens of tiny little tricks, strategies, and techniques that only a flame quirk holder would notice or understand. More than that, young NG's got more fire, flame, and heat-based quirk users working for him now than any hero agency in Japan, so you've likely got an even broader spread of knowledge than normal." Vernon almost choked on her own tongue when she heard someone call her boss, the number 2 hero himself, young NG. Then again, she supposed that if anyone had the right to call the flame hero something like that, it would be a hero from the generation that had immediately preceded the rise of Endeavor and All Might. While it couldn't compare to some of the battle that the current number 1 and number 2 heroes had been involved in, Issen's final battle as a pro hero against the villain King Katana, who'd been hopped up to hell and back on a quirk-enhancing drag, likely an early predecessor to the drag commonly known as Trigger in the current age, was still required watching for final year students at several hero schools across Japan, including the big 3 of UA, Shiketsu, and Ketsubutsu. I guess you've got a point there," she coughed into her fist before continuing. "There's a lot about fire quirks that you need to have a fire type of your own to really understand. Anything else I need to know before I meet the kid?" "Well, first, expect to have him ask for an autograph and to have several questions about your quirk. Kid's a bit of a hero fanboy," Issen offered with a small, fond smile. Mo snorted a bit at that, feeling that they were back on safer ground. "The first is kinda expected, but why would the kid ask me about my quirk?" "Oh, Izuku-kun's a bit of quirk analyst himself, by hobby more than anything else. Seems he got really interested in it back when he visited Matsushida's clinic. Kid's pretty good at it by this point too. Why, just last week he broke down that flashy new rookie MT lady's quirk while taking a snack break during his training. Honestly, it's a bit scary how into it he can get when he starts thinking about something." Issen answered with a bit of a chuckle, before he frowned in thought. "I should also mention that he's not really a fan of Endeavor, says he gives fire quirk users a bad name with how liberal he can be with his quirk. Doesn't help that he's a big All Might fan too." While Vernon instinctively set her face in an indignant expression, she could honestly see where the kid was coming from. While Endeavor's impressive arrest record, one that rivaled and even surpassed All Might's in some areas, and his public image as a strong, stalwart defender and warrior against villainy had earned him some support and followers, his seeming lack of concern for the amount of damage he inflicted and the excessive amount of force he would sometimes bring to bear had earned him just as many detractors. There was a reason that his position of number 2 was never as solid and unshakable as All Might's position as number 1. That combined with his caustic rivalry with the symbol of peace, as much as his PR teams tried to downplay it, and yeah, Mo could see some good reasons the kid would dislike her boss. "Is me being one of Endeavor's sidekicks likely to cause problems?" she asked bluntly. "As long as you don't intend to defend the man's virtues to the death, then no. Izuku-kun is a good boy and he's always been very respectful with the pros who've helped out before, even those with less than stellar reputations. As long as you treat him fairly and don't act in an unheroic manner, he'll give you all the respect that a teacher and trainer deserves, never mind what he believes a pro hero has earned." Issen replied honestly. "I can live with that." Vernon let out a sigh. "Well, at least I'm going in forewarned about that particular landmine. How long until I meet the kid?" Issen checked the clock. "He should be showing up in the next 5 minutes or so. Gotta admit, I'm going to miss teaching him." "So why are you retiring then?" the heroine couldn't help asking. Issen let out a bone-rattling sigh. "I'm an old man, Vernon, one that took more than his fair share of licks when he was still in his prime." The retired pro looked off into the distance, eyes foggy as he reminisced about a day long ago. "Back when I just quit being a sidekick and started my own agency, There was this young punk of a villain who decided that tearing down a new hero agency would be the perfect way to make a name for himself on the streets. Cocky young BE had a nasty electric quirk of his own that let him gather and fire out beams of concentrated electrical energy like lightning bolts out of his hands. Fool called it shock treatment, and the things were strong enough to kill most with a direct hit. Me, I was just getting into my prime, rising up the ranks, and thought I was near unbeatable, and that was all it took for the little BSRD to get the drop on me. I ended up taking a shot directly to the heart. Sheet! Vernon hissed out in horror. How'd you even? I've an electric quirk user myself. Just like how most of you with flame quirks usually have a natural resistance to flames and heat, those like me can usually handle more voltage than a normal person. Issen offered with a small smirk. I managed to power through it, which surprised the hell out of the punk. Before he could even try again, I managed to knock his block off and send him scurrying off, then I promptly collapsed onto the floor. Turns out that the blast had done some minor damage to my heart, something about how it handles electrical impulses. It wasn't an issue back then, but it's only gotten worse as time's gone on. I can't even use my quirk these days without my heart atchin', like someone took a knife to it. I made a few friends in the support industry back in my glory days, and one of them contacted me a few months ago to offer me a spot for some trials at a clinic on Island. They're planning on cloning my heart and then doing a transplant surgery. It's all the latest and greatest, so with any luck I'll be back on my feet within a couple years. It was a chance that I couldn't turn down, just my luck that it comes right when Izuku-kun needs all the help he can get prepping for the UA exams. I'll do my best to do right with the kid, but I'm only going to be here for a few months while this stupid thing heals up. Vernon offered, absently tapping on her cast. Just do your best, that's all he or I could ask. The former pro responded with a tired sigh. Well, we'd best get to the fire room to formally introduce you to Izuku-kun. The training session. Kamiji Mo's apartment. Taking a long drink from the can in her hand, Kamiji Mo collapsed back into her favorite chair with a contented sigh. She'd needed that after meeting her new pupil just a few hours ago. Midoriya Izuku was not your average kid. He'd arrived at the VQTC dressed in a comfortable-looking set of workout clothes and, true to his name, had the greenest pair of eyes she'd ever seen, along with a messy mop of green-black hair on top of his head. His looks were a bit above average for a teenage boy, she supposed, with a face that was more cute than handsome. He was about average height for a 14-year-old and had a fairly well-developed set of musculature. The latter was something Mo appreciated on a professional level more than anything else. She'd seen far too many idiots, particularly those with emitter quirks, that thought they could be a hero relying solely on their quirk. His eyes, however, remained the most drawing feature of the young man. Those bright green orbs were bright and sharp, showing a quick mind constantly taking in everything around him. As Issen had predicted, he'd asked for her autograph almost immediately after getting over his shock that he'd be working with a relatively well-known pro for the next few months. The barrage of questions about her quirk that he'd asked after she'd signed his notebook had been interesting and amusing. She'd ended up using it as a test to see just how sharp the kid actually was, telling him to analyze everything he could about her quirk during their session and give her a rundown on everything he'd discovered and theorized at the end. She'd critique and correct him after they were done. What the F was I thinking? She asked herself now. The several pages of notes he'd presented at the end of their session, written out neatly and quickly in that notebook he apparently carried around religiously, had given her chills. The analysis of her quirk, its strengths, weaknesses, limitations, and probable counters was not only accurate, but better written than several professional analyses she'd had done over the years. She'd briefly thought the kid must have hacked into the National Quirk Registry after somehow figuring out she'd be his new trainer and copied the information from her quirk registration file. That is, until she noticed that he'd written about how her control over her quirk was likely dependent on the length of her hair, something she'd never put in the NQR at all. Sharp did not do this kid justice. Scary was a far better word for it. And then there was the training session itself. Seeing her blazing hair quirk's flames being so easily engulfed and absorbed into that odd liquid fire the teenaged boy had conjured had been astounding to watch. But what had really impressed Vernon was the fact that he'd summoned it without so much as a single gesture. Most quirk users needed some form of physical aid in combination with any mental control they had over their quirk. The reasons why this was ran the gamut from a quirk simply having a fixed origin point like the hands or feet, to using the gestures as an extra mental focus to help improve their control. Seeing a 14-year-old demonstrate that kind of control that even Endeavor usually admitted was more trouble than it was worth was, again, scary was a good word, though a bit of an understatement in her opinion. And of course, that hadn't been the end of it. She'd had the kid run through his entire repertoire of tricks and techniques after that to get an idea of how he normally used his flames. Mo had never been more glad that she was so used to seeing dramatic explosions of flames on a regular basis. Otherwise, the show the kid had put on would have had her jaw clattering against the floor like one of those lame American cartoons. Midoriya had also proven to be completely immune to the heat of his own flames, and had even demonstrated that he could control it enough to have it not burn others as well. Hell, she'd experienced that aspect firsthand when the kid had thrown an attack at her that looked as visually impressive as Endeavor's Kaku Shukuneken. Instead of being royally scorched by the tidal wave of fire, she'd merely been swept back by the impact of the flames. No heat, no burning, nothing. That alone made the kid's quirk pro-level material, but he hadn't stopped there. The green-haired little pyro had demonstrated how well he could shape, condense, and solidify his flames, forging weapons, armor, and even constructs to fight with in addition to simply blasting flames at anything that moved. Kamiji Mo was not normally a person who felt jealous of other people's quirk. Her own blazing hair was dead impressive enough in her own opinion, but she could honestly admit to being more than a bit jealous of the kid by the end of their session. Finding out the exact circumstances about how it had awoken, being chased and nearly flambéed by a crazed jackass with a quirk that turned him into some berserk three-headed dragon monster when he was only 4, had certainly killed a bit of that jealousy. And the kid's planning on applying to UA next year. She mused aloud. F me running, if Nizu and the others are even half as good as their hype, then he's going to be one scary little BS2D by the time they're done with him. Granted, he was well on his way to being one right now, but she could already see some issues that needed work on. For all his combat power, Izuku lacked both combat experience and any form of real combat training. He was also, as Isen had mentioned, overly cautious when it came to causing collateral damage when he started using his quirk. It was a respectable, morally upright attitude to have. Only it was a completely untenable one for a hero. Every quirk that had any form of physical component, particularly elemental quirks, could cause some form of damage to the surroundings. Nearly every hero out there had done some amount of collateral damage sometime in their career. Most who specialized in villain capture did it on a fairly regular basis. After all, villains weren't about to hold back just to keep property damage down. Expecting heroes to handicap themselves to do the same was just stupid. Keeping property damage to a minimum was a good thing, but there was a reason that Hero Public Safety Commission had such a large budget when it came to repairing property damage. So, beating practicality and combat pragmatism into his head, offering up some fire quirk tips, and getting him some actual combat training and experience. Mo mused to herself absently as took another sip of her beer. Yeah, that should be doable in the 3 goddamn months I'm stuck off the front lines. It's better than being chained to a desk again. I'd end up burning it down in a week. Again. Idly brushing off the memory of Endeavor's glowering face as he stood over the blackened remains of her desk after the last time she'd been trapped on desk duty, Mo leaned back and started to plan out exactly what she'd need to do in the next 3 months before nodding slowly. What she had planned should cover all her bases fairly nicely, even if the kid only came to the training center once a week. Oh yeah, by the time I'm done with him the kid will rock that entrance exam. The fire user smirked to herself, her hair flickering excitedly to mimic her own emotions. And I'll be able to say I trained the brat. Heh, well at least I'm going to have a bit of fun while I'm benched. Get ready for some hard work, Midoriya. Get ready to flame on. Coincidentally, in the Midoriya home, Izuku suddenly felt a bad premonition about his future. Chapter 4. Robo-Rumble at UA. Several months later. Observation Room, UA High School. Yaoyorozu Momo was feeling rather pleased with herself. Just a few days earlier she'd completed UA's rigorous recommendation entrance exams, after earning an academic recommendation from her previous middle school, and had earned one of the 4 available seats in the vaunted UA Heroics course. In addition, she had been invited, along with her parents, to observe the practical portion of the general entrance exams. As far as she knew, the other 3 people who'd earned the recommendation seats, Todoroki Shoto, Tokage Setsuna and Hananuki Juzo, would be attending as well. She'd just entered the observation room, a rather large conference room adjacent to the one that UA's staff would be using to judge the exams, when her father stopped abruptly. "Midoriya-san? Is that you?" he called out, a grin spreading on his face. Curious, Momo peeked around him to see just who he was talking to. Yaoyorozu-san, the man her father was addressing, turned around, apparently recognizing her father's voice. He was a fairly tall man with long, straight black hair pulled back and flowing down his back. He had red eyes, a stern-looking face, and was dressed in a well-fitted, and fairly expensive from her own experience, suit. "It is you," her father said in delight as he stepped forward to speak with the man. "It certainly has been a while, hasn't it? I haven't seen you since that charity dinner in Hokkaido." "That it has. I was glad we managed to earn as much as we did. It was for a good cause." Midoriya agreed with a nod. "Ah, I see Eiko-san is with you, and this must be the daughter you keep mentioning." "Indeed, our little Momo is actually the reason we're here today," her mother stated with a proud smile. "She managed to earn an academic recommendation to UA, you see, and even passed the recommendation exams." "Ah, my son mentioned those before. They're supposed to be even more difficult to pass than the regular entrance exams," the dark-haired man agreed before turning his attention to her and offering her a polite bow. "My apologies for not introducing myself earlier, young lady. I am Midoriya Hisashi, and I work for Fabulous Fundaments Fabrics and have collaborated with your parents and their company in the past." "Yaoyorozu Momo. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Midoriya-san." Momo returned with a slight bow of her own, her manners as impeccable as always. "I must say, I didn't know that FFF had managed to gain enough influence to earn a seat observing the UA general exams." Mother asked with a slightly puzzled expression. "We just recently struck a deal with Principal Nizu himself in order to start supplying UA's support course with hero-grade fabrics. They've apparently been having issues with the quality of products coming from their previous distributor, and the good principal had finally enough," the businessman explained proudly. "Since we're now a contracted contributor for the school, we automatically received a single seat to watch the entrance exams. My superiors were kind enough to allow me to be our representative this year. It's not every day that your son takes these exams." "Oh, that's quite the lucky break for you," Father offered with a smile. "Is he on any of the screens at the moment?" Midoriya-san returned his attention to the collection of screens taking up the entirety of the front of the room before pointing to one labeled, "Testing Ground Gamma, Entrance." "There he is. The boy with curly green hair." Momo inspected the screen in question and quickly spotted the boy her father's friend was describing. He looked to be about the same height as her, perhaps an inch or two shorter, with a lean and firmly muscled physique that was easily noticeable through the tight green and silver unitard he was wearing. She quickly noticed that his eyes were a particularly bright green and that his hair was indeed green and extremely curly. It was almost fluffy-looking in her opinion. "I take it he gets his hair from his mother?" she asked curiously. "The color, yes, but he actually inherited the curls from me," Hisashi offered with a chuckle. "My own hair was nearly as bad as Izuku's when I was younger, and I absolutely hated it. Felt like I had a bird's nest on my head if ever let it grow out, and I had to spend nearly a half hour each morning just trying to straighten it out. While I was working in America a few years ago, I came across a salon with a hairdresser that had a quirk he called hair shift that let him permanently alter how someone's hair grew. I took the opportunity to get my hair type changed to straight. Granted, my wife, Inko, scolded me something fierce when I got transferred back to Japan for doing something like that without telling her. Well, it looks like things will be starting soon. Shall we all sit together?" Father offered. "Certainly, having some company to enjoy the show with will be nice." The other man gladly accepted the invitation. The four of them quickly found a place to sit and the conversation between the three adults flowed easily. Might I ask what your son's quirk is? Father asked, causing Momo to perk up slightly as well. Well, I have flame breath and my wife has a levitation quirk that lets her float and draw in small objects. Hisashi offered teasingly. Logically, that should mean that my son would have some form of pyrokinetic quirk. Except, well, you do know that there are 5 main ways quirks are passed from parent to child, right? Quirkless, direct inheritance, combined inheritance, mutation, and strengthened inheritance. Momo quickly offered. Exactly. Now, I've already ruled out him being quirkless and direct inheritance quirks, as in getting a quirk that is the mirror image of one of your parents' quirks, is getting rarer and rarer these days, so that takes 2 options out. Hisashi offered with a proud smile. My son's quirk is actually a mix of all 3 of the remaining categories. It certainly makes mine look like little more than a party trick. It mixes aspects of both mine and his mother's quirks, strengthening them both, and with a few additional properties that seemingly emerged from nowhere. It really is a fascinating quirk. Even the esteemed Dr. Matsushita himself was interested enough to invite Izuku to his offices once a year for an examination. Momo's eyebrows immediately shot up at that admission. Dr. Matsushita was widely recognized as one of the best quirkologists and quirk researchers in the world. For him to express enough interest in a specific boy to invite him to his office year after year for an exam spoke volumes about the strength and uniqueness of that person's quirk. You always do love going the roundabout way when explaining something. Mother stated with a roll of her eyes. Will you at least tell us its name? Silver Tyrant's Flame. It was actually my son's best friend who came up with that one. Hisashi smiled again. A bit ostentatious, I know, but it's certainly a very fitting name, as you'll see soon enough. Momo, for her part, turned her attention back to the screens, now officially intrigued by Midoriya Izuku's quirk. 2 hours previously. Entrance to UA High. We're really here. Izuku murmured in disbelief. After 10 months of hard training, including 3 months of, oh my god, kill me now, training under Burnin, he was finally here at the goal he'd been working towards for over a decade. Hell yeah. Katsuki punched his shoulder excitedly. This has been a long FNG time coming, but we're finally here. Let's go kick butt and take names. With that bold declaration, the blonde-haired bomber strutted past his friend and into the campus like he'd already won first place in the exams. Izuku could only shake his head slightly at his friend's antics. There were times that he truly envied Katsuki's seemingly endless confidence. Right, time to get moving. Izuku stated, steeling himself and taking that first step forward to follow Katsuki, only to seemingly trip on nothing. Oida, what the hell, me? He deadpanned as the ground grew closer. Welp, looks like I'm going to get to meet Recovery Girl sooner than I thought. However, rather than the sharp pain of impact, he was suddenly engulfed in a sense of weightlessness as he stopped mid-fall and started floating in mid-air. Blinking in shock, Izuku turned his head slightly to catch sight of a cute brown-haired girl in a thick brown jacket standing just to one side of him, one hand retracting back from where she'd obviously just reached out and touched him. Hi. The girl greeted him cheerily. Sorry about just using my quirk on you like that without even asking permission, but I thought that falling like that before an exam would have been pretty bad luck. She offered, smiling brightly as she reached out and gently adjusted him so that his feet were back under him. She then brought the tips of her fingers on both hands together. Kaijo! Gravity suddenly returned and Izuku landed on his feet with only a slight wobble. He turned to face the girl with a shy smile on his face. Thanks for that. I don't think I would have enjoyed having to visit the nurse's office before I even made it to the exams. No problem, the girl replied, still smiling. The name's Uraraka Ochako, by the way. Midoriya Izuku, he returned. You here for the hero course exams too? Best of luck to both of us then. Uraraka replied before checking her watch. Shoot, it's almost time for the exams to start. We'd better get moving. Really? Crud. Izuku yelped. He and his new acquaintance started running towards the exam area. At the back of his mind, Izuku was pretty thrilled about meeting such a nice girl right off the bat. Maybe this wouldn't be such a stressful day after all? One round of extensive exams later. Laboratorium. You know, I've never really liked tests all that much, but that one was just plain murder. Izuku muttered tiredly to Katsuki, both boys having already taken their assigned seats. Blame FING Aldra. Place was such a low-level beach fest that the jump in difficulty took us both off guard. The explosion quirk holder offered with an annoyed growl. He'd known that shithole of a school had been nothing but a millstone around his neck, and that test had just effing proved it. We still managed to ace it, no doubts there, but if the classes at UA are anything like that exam, we're definitely gonna have to knuckle down and pick up the slack from Aldra's FING easy mode. Can't argue with that. The Verdette nodded in agreement. After years of dealing with the painfully easy exams at Aldra, it had been a particularly nasty shock to face the level of UA's entrance exams. Once he'd gotten over it and started answering the questions, he was fairly confident in most of his answers, but the sheer shock of the sudden shift and the fact that he'd actually had to exert himself academically to finish on time after so long had been exhausting. "Can I hear you say, yeah?" a voice at the front shouted. The voice hero, President Mike, stood there, his trademark sunglasses shining in the spotlights. When no one answered him, he sighed and continued on. "Welcome to the UA practical exam briefing, listeners. Right here and now, I'm gonna give y'all the down low on how to rock these exams. Ready? Here we go." The screen behind him blinked into life, displaying a mock cityscape along with the shadows of 4 objects surrounding it. On the back of the seat in front of you, you'll find instructions telling you where to go between testing grounds Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon. Once you've finished here and changed into the sports clothes you brought along with you, you'll all be taken via bus to your respective testing grounds, each a large city, chock full of villain bots. The pro hero explained. Each of these robotic Ennard wells are worth a certain number of points. Destroy a 1-pointer, you get 1 point. Destroy a 2-pointer, you get 2. Destroy a 3-pointer, you get 3, and that's the highest ranked bot that there is. The goal here is to rack up as many points as possible inside of 10 minutes. The only rule is no attacking other examinees, listeners. UA will not abide any wannabe anti-heroes. Anyone who tries is automatically disqualified, you dig? Looks like we're in different testing grounds. Izuku noted as he examined his and Katsuki's instructions. "I'm ground Gamma, you're ground Epsilon." The blonde boy clicked his tongue in irritation. Makes sense. They probably don't want friends and classmates to form teams and work together. The green-haired fire user looked on with bemusement as a blue-haired boy wearing glasses stood up and asked President Mike about why there were 4 robots on screen and in the pamphlet, yet he had only mentioned 3 of them. Maybe because this is a test for a heroics course and they want to see how the applicants deal with an unknown variable? Izuku thought with an eye roll. Seriously, this guy needed a chill pill even more than Burnin did. Elsewhere, Kamiji Mo restrained a sneeze before glaring around suspiciously. A moment later, the super stiff boy suddenly whipped around and called him and Kakin out about chit-chatting and not taking these hallowed exams seriously. Izuku was then forced to keep his best friend from reducing said boy into a fine red slurry. Once President Mike calmed things down and explained about the 0-pointer, they were all dismissed with a cheery, "Enjoy your suffering." Making a quick trip to the assigned changing rooms, Izuku quickly changed into the unitard that his dad had managed to have made for him by calling in a few favors at work. It was relatively simple-looking, emerald green with silver trimming and a number of lines running across it, but, far more importantly, it was made out of one of the most fire-resistant fabrics available to modern society, made by a licensed cork producer. A secondary material had also been mixed in to help disperse the heat more efficiently as well. Almost as an afterthought, he slipped on a pair of standard fire-resistant running shoes that could be bought from any cork-specialized shoe store. They weren't anywhere near as effective as the unitard and would likely be reduced to charred threads if he was forced to really go all out with his quirk, but they were better than nothing. "Kick butt, nerd," Katsuki offered with a fist bump as they parted ways to get on their respective buses. "Take no prisoners, Kakin." Izuku returned. "How many times am I gonna have to tell you to stop calling me that stupid iffing nickname before you actually listen?" The blonde boy rolled his eyes in annoyance. About as long it is going to take you to learn to stop swearing every sentence. Izuku returned with a grin. So, if I never, then. The bomber rolled his eyes again. Izuku spent the bus ride over to the assigned testing ground mentally going through his plan. It was just the bare bones of a plan for now, based on the few facts that he was able to discern from the silhouettes of the 3 villain bots he'd seen on the screen. He was still going over it when they finally arrived at the testing site. The one-pointers didn't look like they had much armor, but they seemed to have ranged weapons of some kind set into their arms. Ranged fighters or skirmishers then, hit them hard and fast before they can escape. The 2-pointers were noticeably larger and they looked like they had both melee and ranged weapons built into them, so they'll probably be a lot more aggressive. The 3-pointers looked like they were literally built like a tank, and the white sections on their back probably denoted some kind of ranged weapon. Those will likely be the hardest ones to take down. I also need to remember to keep my flames throttled. With how many people there will be running around, I don't want to risk hitting any of the other examinees in the crossfire. Excuse me, a hand suddenly clapped down on his shoulder, breaking Izuku out of what he quickly recognized as one of his mutter storms. He thought he'd finally grown out of that bad habit. Turning, he caught sight of the overly serious blue-haired guy with the glasses. He was dressed in a tight-fitting blue and white bodysuit now. Your muttering is disturbing the concentration of your fellow examinees. Kindly cease and desist at once. Alright, first? There's nothing in the rules that Present Mike gave about muttering to myself, even if it is a disturbance. Izuku pointed out, now more than a little irked by the boy's over-officiousness. Second, if another person talking is enough to distract someone, then they clearly need to try for another school, because I doubt anyone so easily distracted is suited for UA High's hero course. Third, it's an unconscious bad habit that I've had since I was a kid, I can't control it. And fourth, I'd say you were the one disrupting people by trying to act like some kind of disciplinarian when you don't have any authority over anyone here. The other boy recoiled slightly at the mini-rant, allowing Izuku to quickly shrug off his hand before walking away. He quickly caught sight of Uraraka, who'd changed into a simple black and white tracksuit. She looked vaguely nervous, so he decided to go over and try and help her calm down. Uraraka-san, you're looking a bit tense, he offered as he stepped up next to her. Huh. Oh, Midoriya, yeah, a bit, the brunette offered with a sigh. This is just on a whole other scale than anything that I'd expected. Well, if you ask me, then I'd say you're a shoo-in. You certainly showed how heroic you were when you helped me at the gate. Izuku offered with a kind smile. Just keep calm, keep an eye on your enemy to find a weakness and take them out. Thanks, Midoriya-kun. Uraraka offered with a smile. Wow, all my tension's gone. Sometimes all you need is something to take your mind off what you're worried about so you can stop being nervous. It works for me all the time. Izuku said with a smile in return. And go! President Mike, the gate beneath him suddenly swinging open as the applicants stared up at him in shock. What? You don't get a countdown in real life, listeners. With a roar of determination, all of the examinees charged in except Izuku. With a single solid stomp to the ground, a bubble of silver flames erupted up from beneath him, carrying him slightly into the air. 10 seconds? It took the shape of a silver horse, with Izuku perched on its back, a saddle and stirrups forming under him, with a spear in one hand and reins in the other. Yeah, he said, kicking the horse into a gallop. Okay, it was a bit of theatrics, as he was controlling it with his mind, but looking good was a part of modern-day heroics. Charging into the cityscape, Izuku quickly found one of the one-pointers that President Mike had displayed. It also made him wonder who had designed it, and more to the point, who had thought that a motorized unicycle design was the best fit for this kind of thing. Target acquired. Die hero scum. The machine squawked at him before bringing an arm up, the Gatling gun on it starting to cycle. Silver assault blades. Izuku roared back, flames erupting from his shoulders and swiftly forming into a dozen swords of solidified flames. Before the Gatling gun's barrel could pull off more than single full rotation, the machine was suddenly riddled with silver blades. Letting out an electronic shriek, the machine collapsed and exploded pathetically, the silver flames muffling and absorbing the flames of the blast to almost nothing. "That's one," the green-haired boy said grimly. "Let's get hunting." Guest observation room. Momo could only stare wide-eyed as she finally saw Silver Tyrant's flame in action. The flames themselves were simply beautiful in her opinion, but the display of control and power their owner was showing was equally impressive. "Attaboy Izuku." Hisashi was grinning in delight, every inch the proud father. "Keep it up." "Oh my, that really is an impressive-looking quirk," Momo offered in interest. "And he must have trained extensively to get that kind of control." Most weeks he spends at least 3 days at the Volatile Quirk Training Center, 3 others are for physical training, and the 7th is a rest day. "That's been my boy's schedule for the past 10-odd years," the businessman offered proudly. "And my wife and I have to keep an eye on him to ensure he takes a proper break every now and then." "I know the feeling," Mother offered sagely, looking pointedly at her. If this one wasn't working with her trainer, then she had her nose buried in some form of science book so she could better utilize her own quirk. "My quirk is called creation." Momo answered the obvious question that Hisashi was sending her via a raised eyebrow. "It allows me to use my stored lipids to create any non-living object, but in order to do so, I need to fully understand the molecular structure of the object I wish to create." That's wow. I must say, that has to be the single most useful quirk I've heard of in quite some time. I know my Izuku would love to talk your ears off about it. He's an utter quirk nerd and loves breaking down and analyzing any quirks he comes across. He picked it up as a hobby from spending so much time at Dr. Matsushida's offices, and the good doctor has said that Izuku has quite the talent for it. Hisashi offered proudly, keeping one eye on the monitors as he watched his son run rampant across the cityscape, destroying any robot that crossed his path and rescuing any examinee that he saw being overwhelmed. "He broke that new hero. What's her name?" The Miniyama hero, M-Lady. "He broke down her quirk in about 10 minutes flat after her debut. I'd love to see what he could do with yours." "Now that sounds like a splendid idea," Father offered, causing Momo to turn to him with wide eyes, quickly realizing what he was planning. "How about we invite you and your family over for dinner at some point? It would have to be next month. I'm afraid that after the exams are over, I'm scheduled to attend a large conference in China." Hisashi sighed irritably. "I'll talk to Inko and see if she has a free day next month as well. I'll call you when I find out." "Sounds like a plan," her father replied with a nod. Momo knew exactly what was going through her father's mind at that moment. He was essentially arranging a playdate for her when she was turning 16 in September. She silently resolved to give him the look later tonight to make sure he knew that she was aware of just what he was plotting. Being the only daughter, and thus the sole heiress, of the Yaoyorozu family, the Yaoyorozu Hero Support Company, and the remnants of the Yaoyorozu Zaibatsu that her family had managed to keep clawed together after World War II, all meant that Momo was well used to being sought after for what she was and what connections she could provide others rather than who she was. She was far too used to people wanting to use her for her quirk, and, more irritatingly, she was used to people, both male and female, wanting to get close to her because she was very physically attractive and PBRI had hit her like a truck. All of that meant she was somewhat lonely and isolated, both in general and at school. So her father, trying in his own fumbling way to help his beloved child, often introduced her to the children of his colleagues. More often or not, they ended up being false friends, but she did have a couple of pen friends who she cherished deeply. "I'll just have to roll the dice and see what Midoriya Izuku-kun is like," she thought, a bit of hope in her musings. "We may be classmates after all, so getting to know each other now wouldn't be a bad idea. It would certainly be nice to have a friend in class for once." Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Endeavor glowering at the screens which showed the green-haired boy. His son was also watching the fire user on the screens through narrowed eyes as well. She wondered what was annoying them so much. "With Izuku. And that makes 39. The fire user shouted gleefully as another three-pointer was consumed in flames. Things were going so well. All of his training and efforts were paying off in spades. And he was having the time of his life. Izuku had never had the opportunity to test his quirk against so many mobile targets before, the volatile quirk training center's targets being entirely immobile and incredibly fragile compared to the villain bots he was facing now. Aside from his spars with Katsuki, this was the first time he'd been able to let his quirk run this wild before, and he was starting to see why so many people enjoyed training with other people if it was this exciting. Of course, just because he was having fun on his own didn't mean that he hadn't stayed responsible and lent a hand to anyone he'd found in over their heads. There had been one boy who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, who had been completely overwhelmed by a one-pointer. At a guess, his quirk was a mental or biological affecting one, which would be utterly useless against robots. He'd caught the one-pointer in a snare of flames and then used another burst to hastily reforge a nearby piece of debris into a crude spear before tossing it to the boy, who hadn't hesitated to ram it through the captured machine's chest. Quite why the purple-haired boy hadn't thought to bring in a weapon of his own was something that boggled Izuku's mind. There were forms that could be downloaded and printed off from the UA website that would allow someone a piece of support gear, if they could prove that being denied it would be a detriment to their ability to take the test. Having a quirk that was entirely ineffective against artificial targets would surely be a good enough reason to allow the boy a weapon of some sort. And it was obvious that the entrance exams would involve fighting robots. There was even a picture on the entrance exams section of the website featuring previous examinees fighting them. Granted, the robots on the picture, which looked like it was from when they'd first been used nearly 50 years ago, were far smaller and more humanoid than the ones they were facing now, but the point still stood. 3 minutes left. President Mike announced. Damn it, it's been 7 minutes already? Izuku blinked in shock. This has gone by way too quickly. Taking a quick look around, he quickly caught sight of a lone one-pointer within easy range of his flames. Grinning, Izuku raised a hand and quickly formed a beach ball-sized fireball before firing it at the machine. The fireball slammed into the villain bot, detonating and quickly consuming it in a small flare of silver flames as it self-destructed and brought Izuku's points total to an even 40. Then the ground beneath him started to violently rumble. Moments later, a massive metallic arm seemed to burst from the ground, smashing through a building just a few dozen yards away from his location. Using the destroyed building as a handhold, the rest of the robots soon emerged. Fully revealed, it towered over even the tallest of the surrounding buildings, with 8 glowing red eyes mounted on its rectangular head and its elongated body painted a camo green as it stood on a pair of massive mechanical tracks. That's a zero-pointer? Izuku yelped in shock, quickly recognizing the fourth silhouette from the display. Isn't that a bit much? His reaction was actually fairly mild. Most of the surrounding applicants were already turning tail and running for their lives from the towering behemoth, many screaming for their mothers at the same time. Izuku was about to make a more careful retreat. There was nothing to gain from even trying to fight the thing, and he could just as easily maneuver around it and hunt down some more last-minute points. Help! The sound of a familiar voice suddenly stopped him cold. Turning toward the direction of the scream, he quickly noticed that it was coming where the rubble of that first destroyed building had fallen. Focusing on the debris, he quickly caught sight of Uraraka Ochako trapped under a large slab of concrete. And the newly emerged zero-pointer was already trudging directly toward her, either unknowing or uncaring of her position, and was about to run her over. Any thoughts of retreating were instantly immolated from his mind. Instead, his steed was already racing toward the debris field while his mind flew through the mental repertoire of items he'd mastered forming and solidifying his flames into. With less than a second's thought, Izuku had selected the item he needed and raised a single arm into the air. This scale of creation required a bit of mimetic gesturing, even from him. Silver flames erupted from his extended arm, bursting upward like a geyser and quickly reshaping themselves into a sphere, which quickly began to grow larger and larger as more flames were added. Soon the rush of flames stopped and the sphere began to shift, elongating and stretching into an oblong shape as long as an 18-wheeler. The flames then began to condense, details forming as the flames reshaped itself into a solid form. Within a few seconds, the flames had formed into a massive, ornately decorated spear that hovered in midair, awaiting its master's command. Silver spear of rampart smashing. Izuku roared out and moved his arm towards the zero-pointer. The massive construct rocketed forwards with the full force of Izuku's will behind it, crossing the distance between its creator and the robot in the blink of an eye, smashing headlong into the massive machine's chest and actually managing to push it back several meters. Sadly, the armor protecting it was amazingly thick enough that the large spear hadn't been able to do more than cut a hole in the outermost layer. Izuku was frowning as his silver charger rapidly closed the distance to the debris pile where Ochako was pinned. That had been far less effective than he'd hoped, and the silver spear was his largest controllable attack. Years of training had let him develop a certain pattern. Once he'd mastered controlling a certain amount of flames at once, he'd either start building up to a new larger amount or start working to increase the precision of his control on his previous gains. Gomen-sensei had always encouraged him to never stop trying to push his limits since emitter types like them could only increase the power of their quirks by constantly pushing their limits. Once you'd mastered a certain of strength, always push for more. That was the mantra that had allowed Thunder Hero Issen to rise to the top. There wasn't enough weight behind it to pierce though that armor, the green-haired pyromancer realized. Normally, fire lacked any form of physical mass, but due to its unique nature, the silver flames of his quirk were closer to a liquid in nature, and that included having a physical mass that could be weighed like any other liquid. Interestingly enough, 1 liter of his silver flames weighed exactly the same as a liter of water, 1 kilogram. Right now, his maximum capacity was just under 7,000 US gallons, or 26 metric tons, of silver fire for any single attack. That the machine could withstand the full force of that much concentrated silver fire, propelled by the full force of his pyrokinetic ability, spoke volumes of the machine's durability. It would take a measure of strength approaching all mights in order to fell that behemoth with it. Single strike. But that didn't mean he was done just yet. With a thought and a wave of his extended arm, the spear seemed to dissolve into a large pillar of silver fire which quickly began to entwine itself around the zero-pointer, binding its arms and particularly the tank treads it used to propel itself with thick tendrils of condensed silver flame. The machine audibly struggled against the silver bindings, the metallic whining of strained machinery audible even from a distance, but for now they managed to hold. Meanwhile, Izuku had finally reached his destination, pulling his fiery steed to a halt in front of the stunned form of Uraraka Ochako and leaping off. "Uraraka-san, are you okay?" he called as he came to kneel next to her. "Why, yeah, just a bit trapped," the brunette answered with a strained grin. One of her arms was stuck under a separate piece of rubble than the one pinning her legs, rendering her quite helpless to escape. "Stay still, I'll get you out of there." With most of his concentration focused on keeping the zero-pointer restrained, Izuku was forced to rely on mimetic aids to help create and control his constructs. With a thought, his right arm was engulfed in a large plume of silver flame that quickly solidified into a massive copy of his own arm. With great care, he manipulated his newly enlarged limb and used it to gently remove the rubble that was pinning her arm to the ground. Ochako hissed as she tried to move it. It was sore as hell, but she honestly couldn't tell if it was a bruised bone, strained muscles, or something worse. "That's one. I'll have your legs free in a second." Izuku reassured her before enlarging his silver arm and repeating the process with the larger one, sighing in relief as he managed to get her leg free without any complications. The brunette used her good arm to force herself to a sitting position, wincing as she felt her right ankle. It was definitely sprained at the very least, if not broken. "Can you stand?" the green-haired boy asked as he dismissed the extended arm. "No, I think it's sprained or twisted. Maybe broken." Ochako hissed out haltingly. "I'll have to carry you then. I can't hold that behemoth back much longer." Izuku stated, silently grateful that whoever had designed that Demed monstrosity hadn't decided to give it any apparent projectile weapons in addition to having fists the size of an SUV. He quickly and gently scooped up the slightly shorter girl into a bridle carry before bringing his horse around. Another mental command formed a small, simple staircase of solidified flames to help him get her mounted before he swung himself back astride his steed as well. A thought dismissed the stairs and got the horse galloping again, putting as much distance between them and the zero-pointer, which was already beginning to break free of its binding, as they could get. "This is some kind of quirk you've got here." Uraraka breathed in awe as Izuku focused on guiding the galloping construct through the fields of debris. What even is this stuff? Fire, the vedette answered, smirking slightly when she looked up at him in shock. Fire? The brunette blurted out in shock. Beebed, it's not even hot, she muttered, absently poking the horse's silvery mane with a disbelieving finger. My fire only burns what I want it to, Uraraka-san. Izuku answered with not a little pride. So long as you're with me, you won't even feel slightly warm, let alone be burnt. A sudden crash caused bother teens to turn around, finding the zero-pointer had finally broken free of its restraints and was now pursuing them. Whether it was the machine's limited programming responding to Izuku's attempt to attack it or just bad luck, the massive machine had apparently locked onto the duo and was now in hot pursuit. Its massive treads allowing it to easily ignore the scattered debris and slowly gain ground on the fleeing teens. Oh crud! Izuku murmured. Well, that's a thing. Any ideas on how to deal with big, metallic and angry back there? All my biggest attack did was put a gash in its armor, he asked his companion. Can you make anything with this fire of yours? Uraraka asked nervously. Anything I can form a strong mental image of, the green-haired boy answered with a nod. 1 minute left. Present Mike called even as the zero-pointer continued to gain on them. It didn't look like it would be able to reach them before the exam ended, but neither teen really wanted to risk that calling time would actually stop the behemoth. Then what about a really big drill head? The girl offered in a rush. That could work. I've already managed to make a hole in its armor to get it started. Izuku agreed, slowly their mount slightly so that he could freely raise both his arm over his head without risking falling off. Both arms quickly erupted into geysers of silvery flames, once more forming into a massive orb that quickly reshaped and solidified itself into a massive spiral drill. It wasn't the most realistic creation he'd ever made, looking far more like something out of an anime, but needs must when one was being pursued by an angry giant robot. With another thought, his brow furrowing in concentration, Izuku set the massive construct spinning on its horizontal axis. Silver Drill Giga Breaker, he called out as he sent the drill flying straight at the same point he'd struck with his silver spear, right at the center of its chest. It was actually a lot harder to keep it on course thanks to the drill's rapid spinning, but he managed it. The massive drill slammed into the zero-pointer like the fist of an angry god, striking exactly where Izuku had aimed. The comparatively small tear provided just enough leverage for the massive drill to do its work, and the massive machine's armor was quickly torn to shreds before the drill got to work on the far more fragile internal components. Whoa! Ochako whispered in awe as the massive drill tore straight through to the opposite side of the zero-pointer's chest, small explosion from delicate machinery being completely annihilated echoing around it. You think it's gonna blow like the smaller ones? She asked nervously. I'd like to think UA wouldn't be that dramatic, but just in case. Izuku muttered as he extended an arm toward the drill, slowly opening and spreading his hand as wide as possible. While he normally disdained from using mimetic gestures to help in controlling his flames, it was a necessary evil when he was working with such large amounts of his silver fire. Instantly the drill, which had lodged itself partly poking out of the zero-pointer's back, dissolved back into a mass of silver flame that quickly spread itself outward, engulfing the entirety of the massive machine in a shroud of silver. And just in time too. A few seconds later a muffled kaboom erupted from beneath the flaming shroud as the zero-pointer self-destructed. The addition of the blanket of silver fire robbed the explosion of most of its fury, with just the shockwave of displaced air sending some examinees stumbling to the ground, with a few smaller bursts of flame managing to break free through holes in the blanket created by the pressure wave. Izuku quickly wrapped up all of the loose flames with his silver fire, completely smothering them, before allowing it to dissipate safely. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief when he saw the pile of scorched scrap that had once been the zero-pointer. Phew, well, I'm glad that's over with. Time's up. President Mike shouted. I hope I managed to get enough points. Uraraka sighed out. I think I managed about 30 before that thing nearly buried me alive. I got 40. Though from what I heard the others shouting about as they went, a lot of the other applicants didn't manage to get out of their teens or low 20s, so I think you're still ahead of the pack, Uraraka-san. Izuku offered before he quickly caught sight of a very easily recognizable old woman walking through the site with a syringe-shaped cane. Ah, there's the youthful heroine, Recovery Girl. She'll have you fixed up in no time. These drat exams are getting worse with every year. I'm gonna have to put my foot down with that varmint of a principal before one of you lot manage to get yourselves killed. Recovery Girl groused as she watched Izuku carefully lower Ochako to the ground from his horse, which dissolved into a small pyre of silver flames before dispersing a moment later. Okay dearies, what seems to be the damage? Uraraka-san here has a possible fracture in her left arm and a twisted, maybe broken, ankle on her right leg, the Verdette pyromancer reported respectfully as he stepped back to let the healer do her work. I'm completely unharmed, maybe a bit tired after using so much of my quirk in such a short time frame. That blasted zero-pointer did a number on you, HM? I swear that thing does more damage to the applicants than the rest of those bots put together. The healer sked and kissed Ochako's forehead. Instantly, a glow appeared around her injured arm and leg, and the brunette felt the pain in them fade to nothing. Hey, all the pain's gone. Oh wow, I'm tired. Ochako said before covering her mouth as a yawn overcame her. That's the downside to my quirk, I'm afraid. Recovery Girl offered, smiling at the tired girl. It takes your stamina in order to speed up the natural healing process. Have some gummies, both of you. They'll pep you up a bit. Passing the pair some of the treats, the healing hero walked off in search of more patients. I'm gonna go back to my hotel and sleep the rest of the day. Ochako groaned, before blushing as her stomach rumbled. That after I have something to eat first. Hotel. Izuku repeated. I'm from Mie, so I arrived here for the exams yesterday, and I'm staying in a hotel overnight before heading home tomorrow, the brunette explained. Thing is, there's no meals at my hotel, and I don't know any of the places around here. Midoriya-kun, are you local? Do you know somewhere inexpensive I could go to? Izuku internally frowned. Most of the hotels in Mizudafu provided breakfast, lunch and dinner to their guests as a basic service. The only ones that didn't were the local motels, and those tended to cater to a fairly rough crowd. While he was sure Uraraka could take care of herself if she managed to score 30 villain points, he wasn't sure if he liked the idea of her going back to somewhere like that. Forcing his thoughts back under control, Izuku nodded. Depends where your hotel is. Where are you staying at? The name she gave him confirmed that it was a motel, but it was, very fortunately, one of the better ones, which made up for its lack of meals with secure rooms and a fairly upstanding reputation. His father had stayed in that one when he was working to secure his company's new contract with UA. Izuku had naturally badgered his father about any details when he found out, and had stated that he wished all the motels he stayed at were that secure. Well, there's a couple of places you could go to, he said as he walked with her out of the training ground and back to the bus. The two parted at the gates of UA, but not before exchanging numbers with each other. As he waved Ochako goodbye, Izuku felt lighter than he had in years. First, he had, no questions asked, kicked butt at the exams. Second, he had made a friend, which was so very rare. Thanks to the brown-nosing tendencies that Aldris seemed to encourage, he and Katsuki had basically been each other's only real friends for years now. Not that being friends with Katsuki was bad, but Izuku was a friendly boy who liked the idea of having friends, so having to ignore overtures because they were made under false pretenses had been a very unpleasant experience. Hey, son, a familiar voice called, breaking him out of his thoughts and forcing him to look around. Dad? He yelped at the sight of Midoriya Hisashi, standing in front of UA's gates looking highly amused. What are you doing here? Thanks to my company's new agreement with UA, we got a seat in the guest observation room, his father replied with a grin. I pretty much demanded that my bosses let me take it or they'd need to replace me, just so I could at least see my son and nephew in all but blood kick butt and take names. And son, did you not fail to disappoint? Most girls talk about having a prince on a white horse sweep them off their feet, but that young lady got a prince on a silver horse, didn't she? Dad! Izuku groaned. It's not like that. I don't think the zero-pointer could see her, so Uraraka-san might have been squashed. Son, don't you think the teachers would have swooped in to save her? They are pro-heroes after all. Hisashi pointed out, still very amused. But you proved that you were a hero there, no mistake. If you don't get in, I will be very surprised. Uncle Hisashi? What the hell are you doing here? Katsuki asked as he walked up to his friend and pseudo-uncle. Taking you boys home so you two can get changed. Then we can go out and celebrate you too. Smoking the competition while I regale the rest of the family with tales of your daring do. The man answered, clapping a hand on Katsuki's shoulder. I saw you do very well out there, Katsu. Your parents are going to be very proud when I tell them about it. Although he still looked grumpy, a rare honest smile crossed the face of the explosion quirk user at that. Now, let's get going, my car's just a short walk over here. The man led the two off, chatting happily, and unaware of the glowering he was getting from the Todoroki duo standing unnoticed nearby in the shadow of the school itself. Later. Endeavor's office, Endeavor Agency. Japan's #2 ranked hero, the Flaming Hero, Endeavor, sat alone in his office, leaning back slightly in his chair with a familiar scowl across his face. This was by no means an uncommon occurrence, but the source of his ire was a fresh one. Normally, his ire was directed toward the smiling glory hound known as All Might, or one of his new interns proving to be a waste of time, or his masterpiece Shoto's continued rebellion. But this time, it was an entirely new emotion that was causing Todoroki Enji discontent, one that he'd never felt before in his entire life. Envy. Sheer unadulterated envy. Such a powerful quirk, that's such dedication, that's such control, that's such talent, that's such ability. The fire user thought, his gut churning. On his own, Midoriya Izuku has managed to forge himself into the perfect material to test and hone my masterpiece against if it wasn't for his quirk's greatest weakness being Shoto's preferred element. He had listened to the rave review that Burnin had given him on her temporary pupil after she returned several months ago with a heavy degree of skepticism. Surely no child born with such a powerful flame quirk could have the talent or work ethic to develop it to such a fine level of control on their own with only the limited guidance of a former hero who lacked even an appropriately similar quirk. The sheer level of ability that his head sidekick had described had seemed the stuff of pure fantasy, and he'd said as much. Yet today he had been proven grossly in error. The fact that he now owed Burnin a month free of paperwork duties only added to his annoyance. Not only did the boy possess a quirk that could rival Shoto's in terms of raw power, but he had one that seemed to have been forged specifically to counter other fire quirks. To add to that, the boy seemed to be able to create his unique flames in not only immense quantities but also shape and solidify them at will without the need of mimetic gestures, for the most part. While Endeavor could control his flames to an extent, it was not easy and took focused willpower to do so. Hellflame was not an easy quirk to control, and Enji had spent literal decades training and forging his mind, body and quirk into a single weapon wielded by his will. And now, as if to mock him, along comes Midoriya Izuku, able to do almost everything he could do but better, and seemingly without any effort. He knew full well from Burnin's reports that that was not the case, that the boy had apparently dedicated himself to a degree that would make even Enji himself proud in his goal of mastering his quirk, and the effort and focus in the boy's eyes while he fought against the zero-pointer was just as obvious. But still, to see one so young with such power and control, it rankled him more than he'd like to admit. He had also seen the way Shoto had glared at the boy. A fire user who seemed to have no problems throwing his fire around was akin to the proverbial red flag for his youngest son, so Midoriya had just risen to the #2 position on Shoto's "People I Need to Overcome" list, if Enji wasn't mistaken. You wish to only use your mother's ice? Fine. Defeat Midoriya during the sports festival and feel cocky, Shoto. Endeavor snorted. The real world will show you that your determination is only going to hurt you. Looking at the time, the flame hero picked up a pen and started filling out forms. Paperwork never ended when you were in charge of an agency, especially forms for destroyed equipment from burning in an agency filled with fire quirk users, and he wanted to get home on time for once. Chapter 5. Deliberations, Meetings and Letters. 2 days after the general entrance exam. Conference room, UA High. So, we are in agreement? Kirishima Ijiro shall be accepted into UA as a member of Class A, while Tetsu will be accepted as a part of Class B. Nizu, the principal of UA, asked the room at large. Sounds like a good plan to me. Sekijiro-kan, the blood hero, Vlad King, agreed with a nod. Having them both in the same class might make teaching them a bit easier, but there's too much of a risk of them constantly butting heads and trying to outdo each other. That kind of thing could turn into the worst sort of rivalry real fast, which would sink any sense of class unity before it even has a chance to take root. A rivalry across class lines will be a lot more manageable if it develops, easier to keep healthy and productive too. Aizawa Shota, the erasing hero, Eraserhead, merely gave an annoyed grunt as he absently waved his hand, wanting to get this DMED meeting over with as quickly as possible. The man honestly looked like he hadn't slept for days. Nizu just knew he was going to have another talk with the man about properly managing his time. While he respected Aizawa's desire to remain an active-duty underground hero even while he was working with UA, he wasn't about to let the man's inability to maintain a proper sleep schedule interfere with his job here. UA demanded the best out of everyone involved with it, both its students and its staff. Excellent. The indeterminate mammal stated with a nod, clicking a couple buttons on his desk. A yellow A and a blue B appeared at the bottom of Kirishima and Tetsu pictures respectively. And speaking of possible rivalries, our next pair of possible problem applicants could cause some similar difficulties based on where they're placed. Another set of clicks had the images of Kirishima and Tetsu shrink down and rejoin the other 38 accepted hero course applicants on the screen, some already marked with A or AB but most still unmarked, only to quickly be replaced a moment later with two more boys. One was a boy with red and white hair split right down the middle, a burn scar evident over his left eye and a deadpan expression on his face. The other boy had curly green and black hair with bright, friendly green eyes and a kind, if nervous, smile. First we have Todoroki Shoto, youngest son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. Nizu stated, indicating the bicolored boy before clasping his paws in front of him. He possesses an incredibly powerful quirk called, rather unoriginally, half cold, half hot, which allows him to both generate immensely powerful bursts of fire, flames and heat from the left side of his body and also generate equally powerful surges of cold, frost and ice from his right side. The raw power and heat generated from his flames are supposedly equal to that of his father, and the strength and amount of ice he can produce, which was apparently inherited from his mother, is at least equal in strength. All told, he has the potential to eclipse his father in raw combat ability based on his quirk alone. Because he's able to overcome the base weaknesses of both sides of his quirk using the opposing side. Using his ice side to counter any overheating caused by his fire and using his fire side to counter any risk of hypothermia caused by overusing his ice. Namuri Kayama, the 18+ hero, Midnight, stated with a raised eyebrow. It certainly sounds like an astoundingly powerful quirk. Exactly. Unfortunately, our information on one half of his quirk is largely unconfirmed. During the recommendation exam, he did not make a single use of his fire side, refusing to use it to even warm himself until after the exam ended, the principal stated with a sigh. I have done some investigating into the matter since, and every source I've found points to the same thing, that young Todoroki has all but forsworn from using his fire side for any combative purpose, even simply regulating his body heat during combat. That is utterly illogical. Aizawa stated coldly, already eyeing the image of the bicolored teen with annoyance. He just knew that this was going to lead to a pain in his neck. Why did he have to deal with so much dumbass teenage angst? Quite, which is why he's already a prime candidate for 1A. Nizu agreed with a nod, causing Aizawa to groan. For all that he complained, the man did have an incredible talent for straightening out students with behavioral issues. Or, as Aizawa had more crassly put it, being able to pull their heads out of their buttes. The other applicant is one Midoriya Izuku. Like young Todoroki, he possesses a powerful quirk with immense destructive potential and is even categorized as a hybrid type as well. The so-called Silver Tyrant's flame combines aspects of fire and water to form an entirely new element unlike anything seen before. As the silver flames produced by his quirk are neither purely a flame or a liquid, It is nearly impossible for anyone but Midoriya-kun himself to manipulate them. Even fire and water manipulators working in tandem have been unable to exert any solid control over it. Moreover, the liquid quality of his flames allows them to envelop normal forms of fire and either smother or consume them to further fuel and enhance the silver fire. Altogether, it is a rather fascinating ability, not to mention its potential in both combat and rescue work should be obvious. And he certainly demonstrated how well he could utilize it during the entrance exams. Midnight offered with a knowing grin. Nizu nodded, before a click of a button brought up a short, edited clip reel of Izuku's performance during the entrance exams. DMN. Vlad King let out an impressed grunt as he watched the giant flame drill bore through the zero-pointer. He's already at a level where he can freely shape his flames as he desires, and it looks like he can at least partially solidify them as well. Speed and build-up could use a bit of work, but otherwise he's already incredibly impressive. Not even Endeavor has that kind of fine control over his fire. The man can build up and focus his fire like no one else in the business, but his ability to manipulate it has never been anywhere close to that kind of detailed work. More impressive in my book is that the boy's already learned how not to burn people with that fancy fire of his. He actually managed to carry an injured candidate to me on that silver horse he was riding about on, and the girl wasn't even sweating. Shizenji Chiyo, the youthful heroine, recovery girl, put her own 2 cents in. Most youngsters focus on just getting the most power out of their quirks as they can. We usually have to beat proper control into their heads with a bloody stick. For him to have reached that level of control at such a young age. Indeed. Nizu offered with a bright grin. Young Midoriya has put an immense amount of work into refining his control and mastery of his quirk. My own investigations put his normal training routine as something that many active, professional heroes would wilt at the thought of. His primary mentor was the retired Thunder hero. Issen thought he did spend a short, 3-month PRD under the tutelage of one of Endeavor's flaming sidekickers, Burnin. Both spoke rather highly of young Midoriya's work ethic and forethought. Sadly, his quirk is not without its weaknesses. The largest being is that his flames, due to their unique fluid-like nature, are particularly vulnerable to ice quirks. If they are exposed to below freezing temperatures for any extent of time, they will rapidly freeze and solidify. Another weakness would be, like many fire quirks, his quirk is highly reactive to his emotions. While he is happy or simply calm, the flames are perfectly obedient. If he becomes angered, the flames will likely become far more aggressive and rage against his control. If he is scared or sad, his flames will instinctively lash out against whatever is causing those emotions. You make it sound like the boy's flames are practically alive, Principal. Ishiyama Ken, the building hero, Cementos, noted curiously. It certainly does act like that in some ways, the principal answered with a grin. It is worth noting that young Midoriya is well aware of both these limitations. I understand he has trained extensively to combat ice quirks and has worked heavily on ensuring he has tight control of his own emotions and particularly his temper. However, the issue with these two in particular is that Midoriya has indicated a particularly strong distaste towards Endeavor while Todoroki has seemingly developed a rather sudden dislike for the boy based from recordings of the viewing room on the day of the exams. Great, more teenage drama, but I don't really see the issue on this one. The green kid seems to at least have his sheet in order if he's already worked on getting his temper under control, so I don't see why we couldn't put him with Vlad. Aizawa asked dully. Any student that seemed to indicate a need for a firm hand in order to get control of their quirks were normally sent to Aizawa in 1A due to his own quirk letting him quickly shut down their quirks if they went out of control. Vlad was put in charge of any students that had good control but were judged to need help in either strengthening or more creatively utilizing their own quirks. The remainder that didn't fall into either of those categories could be placed in either class. While Midoriya didn't need any help strengthening or utilizing his quirk, he also already seemed to have developed a good enough level of control that he was unlikely to need Aizawa to rein him in, so he should, technically, fall into that third category. Normally I'd agree Shota-kun, but I would like you to consider what could happen if young Midoriya was knocked unconscious in the midst of a training exercise while his emotions were less than stable. Nizu offered with a raised eyebrow. Nearly every one of the attending teachers felt a shiver run down their spines as that idea took root. Hero training could be incredibly rough at times, and it was actually fairly common for students to be knocked unconscious in a particularly trying exercise or during spars. Given the fact that they'd all just recently been reminded of the kind of destruction Midoriya's quirk was capable of unleashing, none were keen on betting that it would simply extinguish itself if the boy was suddenly knocked out, particularly if his emotions were running hot at the time. Christ on a goddamned crutch. Aizawa let out a pained reaching up to massage the bridge of his nose. So, not only do I have to deal one dumbass student with enough emotional baggage that they're purposely hamstringing their own quirk and has apparently developed a low-at-first-sight relationship with another student, but I've also got to deal with said student whose quirk has as an unknown level of sapience, unidentified limits, and could turn into a firestorm if the kid loses his temper. Nizu, I wanted to med raise. Granted, you'll see a 5% raise to your pay when the new school year starts. The hyper-intelligent animal agreed without argument, tapping a few keys and causing yellow A's to appear at the bottom of both boys' photos. With that sorted, let's move on to our next problem case, Mineta Minoru. I actually have a plan to deal with this particular case. 5 days later. Living room, Midoriya residence. Kaken? What are you doing here? Izuku asked before blinking in surprise. Aunt Mitzi? Uncle Masaru? He just had his morning shower and was just leaving his room after finishing getting dressed for the day only to find an additional 3 people sitting around his family's breakfast table. Morning, Aizu-chan. Mitsuki gave her semi-nephew a cheerful wave from her spot. Masaru merely nodded over his cup of morning coffee. Did you friggin' forget just what day today was, nerd? Katsuki snapped, visibly fighting to keep his language in check around Inko. He then held up a thick letter with a very prominent seal on it, a golden U&A. We're supposed to get these in from UA today. Izuku instantly went bug-eyed as he caught sight of that all-important item. His jaw went slack as let out a jumbled, high-pitched, "Wait, you actually did? When the Hisike did you turn into such a space case?" His best friend groaned out in frustration. The mail service always hits our home a bit before it reaches here, so we decided to come over and wait for yours so you and Katsu can open them together. Masaru offered with a smile. Not that there's much doubt among anyone here that you two managed to get in, especially not after Hisashi gave us a play-by-play of the exams. You bet, our boys cleaned house, the Midoriya patriarch stated proudly, clapping Katsuki on the shoulder. I almost felt sorry for those poor bots. Dead straight, the young bomber agreed with a semi-feral smile as he remembered the fun of the exams. The sound of the mailbox rattling echoed through the apartment like a bomb going off, instantly quieting all the occupants. Inko, who had just risen to pour herself another cup of coffee, froze briefly before creakily putting the kettle down and slowly, robotically marching toward the door. Mum, you need use your joints. Izuku called out in concern. Don't worry about it, kid. She did the exact same when we were younger and were waiting for our own exam results to come in. Don't get me started about how bad she got when we were waiting for our midterm and finals results in college. Mitsuki offered with a laugh. If I remember correctly, wasn't your temper even worse than Katsu's during those times? Hisashi asked ruefully. Quiet you. Mitsuki gave her childhood friend's husband a pointed glare. Masaru just chuckled quietly as he watched the byplay. Aya Izu.Izuku. Inko charged back in, both hands clutching a letter. It's here. And thus begins the second stage. Mitsuki groaned with an amused smirk on her lips. I swear, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Kaken, you should probably open yours first while me and Dad get Mum calmed down. Izuku offered as he led his overexcited and panicking mother over to the living room before gently guiding her into her favorite seat, Hisashi chuckling affectionately as he sat down beside her and threw a comforting arm over her shoulder. To heck with that. I want everyone to see just how badly I murdered these exams, so you 3 are watching too. Katsuki snapped back while jutting out his jaw stubbornly, quickly rising from his own seat and stomping into the living room as well before plopping down in the middle of the couch. Mitsuki and Masaru exchanged half-amused, half-exasperated looks about how inhumanly stubborn their firecracker of a son had turned out before moving to sit down on either side of him as he quickly tore open his letter. "Huh, what the frack is this?" Katsuki asked as he pulled out a small metal disc about the size and thickness of a coaster from the envelope. "That's a hologram projector." Hisashi answered loudly in surprise. "It looks like one of the new portable models that run on internal batteries. They're not even in mainline production yet. As expected from UA, they don't skimp on anything, even the acceptance letters." Katsuki curiously put the small projector on the table, with the yellow lens-like projector facing up before carefully pressing the small button built into the side. Instantly the lens lit up and 2 seconds later a larger-than-life image of the number 1 pro hero, All Might, appeared floating above the center of the room, much to everyone's astonishment. He was dressed in a yellow pinstripe suit, which only added further confusion, and was standing in what looked like a small showroom with a large monitor taking up most of the area behind him. "I am here as a hologram," All Might declared boisterously. "Greetings, young Bakugo. It does this old hero's heart good to see you treading down the path of heroics, just you proclaimed so proudly when you were but a mere boy. However, since these batteries don't last forever, we should cut to the chase. This was from Yue, right?" Katsuki muttered to his mother, who merely nodded dumbly in agreement. "During the written exams you performed most admirably, scoring a whopping 97.5%. Of all those that competed in and passed the practical exams, you scored number 1. Well done, young man." "Hell yeah." This praise from his idol was more than enough to reinvigorate Katsuki out of his momentarily shock. He was still more than a bit confused why All Might of all people was delivering his scores, but that could be ignored for now. As for the practical exams, you broke the old record for number of villain points earned with a whopping 80 points. All Might continued on, showing a series of video clips of Katsuki wreaking unholy hell through the testing ground across the monitor behind him. "But you should know that there's more to heroics than just raw combat strength. The true essence of a hero is saving others, and you certainly showed that in spades as well. Several times during the exam you placed yourself in harm's way or leapt into the fire to protect your downed or exhausted competitors." The monitor changed, showing images of Katsuki moving to rescue other applicants from being overwhelmed. The practical exams are monitored and reviewed by a panel of UA's elite staff whose sole purpose is to distribute rescue points for actions of heroic valor, and they were most impressed with your actions. Bakugo Katsuki, 80 villain points and 41 rescue points for a solid total of 121 points. That breaks even my own record of a solid well done indeed, young Bakugo. Welcome to your hero academia. Yes. The explosion quirk user roared in victory, rising up from the couch to punch the air and nearly cutting off the last line of the hologram. And congratulations on earning second place in the practical exams. What? Who the fracking hell managed to beat my score? Katsuki roared in outrage, his victory turning to ashes in his mouth. Ah, don't get your panties in a knot, brat. You got in and earned gold in the written exams and silver in the practicals. That's something worth celebrating. Mitsuki exclaimed, pulling her fuming son back into his seat and threw an arm around him in a half-hug while Masaru ruffled his hair proudly. Congratulations, Katsuki, I knew you'd do splendidly. Inko, who had managed to calm herself down, offered him a kindly smile that did more to soothe the boy's temper than either of his parents' actions. You did great, Kaken. You even managed to get All Might to personally present your acceptance letter. Izuku congratulated his friend. His ego suitably assuaged, Katsuki let out a huff of air. Nothing to it, he offered before turning to his best friend. Your turn, Izu. Open it up. Wow, he really must be excited about this. Kaken hasn't called me Izu since we were like 9. Izuku blinked, but obeyed his best friend's urgings and opened his letter, quickly finding and removing the hologram projector and placing it on the table next to Katsuki's before powering it up. I am here as a projection. All Might declared once more. Again? Katsuki yelped in shock. Why is it All Might? Izuku gaped in open-mouthed shock. Greetings, young Midoriya. You can't imagine how pleased I was to see you and young Bakugo applying for UA, just as you both proclaimed so proudly those many years ago. I personally requested the privilege of presenting the two of you with your results, the #1 hero proclaimed proudly. Since I was already asked to do these special presentations for the top 10 applicants, and you both easily cleared that hurdle with room to spare, there were no issues with Principal Nizu accepting my request. Now, on to your results. He actually still remembers us, even after all this time? Izuku breathed out, tearing up a bit. It had been fairly obvious in Katsuki's letter, but it was really hitting home right now, and Izuku was honestly moved that his idol still remembered them. Who'd forget a couple of future badasses like us? Katsuki responded, reaching past his parents to punch Izuku lightly on the arm. For the written exams, you managed to place second overall among all of those who went on to pass the practicals. With an impressive score of 97%, All Might's projection elaborated with a grin. You should know that first and second place this year were separated by a mere 0.5%. You should be proud, young Midoriya. Sweet F-. Katsuki muttered with a blink, for once managing to avoid a whack from his mother for his language. Yeah. Mitsuki actually agreed with her son's sentiment for once as she blinked as well. I knew the two of you were both big brains, but just a 0.5% away from tying for first? Goddamn, that is just amazing. As for the practical exams, you did incredibly well, scoring a very impressive 40 points by taking down various villains. On its own, that would be more than enough to pass. The number once continued as images and clips of Izuku taking down villain bots were displayed across the monitor. However, UA is looking for more than just fighting ability in its hero course applicants. They look for those who are willing to aid others and put themselves in harm's way to protect the peace. And young man, you proved that you had all of that in spades. The monitor changed again, this time displaying Izuku saving or otherwise assisting various other applicants across the false cityscape. The scene of him restraining the zero-pointer and rescuing Ochako took up the entire screen near the end. Oh Izuku, I am so proud of you. Inko hugged her son warmly, proud beyond measure at his heroics. She knew how much her son wanted to help people, and seeing him valiantly work to protect or save others warmed her heart. Most of all, there is this young lady who you just might recognize. All Might grinned as the screen changed to that of a familiar girl in front of President Mike. Uraraka-san. Izuku started, blushing slightly. Oh ho! Oh ho! Those exclamations from both his mother and his honorary aunt sent a shiver of dread down Izuku's spine. She re-entered UA after you left and tracked down President Mike. Please take a listen to just what she had to say. All Might directed, and Izuku snapped to listening and watching. Yeah, President Mike? Do you remember the green-haired boy wearing a silver and green jumpsuit? Uraraka asked. The one who saved me from the zero-pointer? Mike responded with a curious eyebrow raised. Yes, sure do. That little listener made quite the impression. Can you give him some of my points? The entire room gawped as the girl asked that with a completely serious expression on her face. If he hadn't needed to save me, he could have gotten more points, so please, give him some of mine. Shida, there's no way. Izuku spluttered. If they took any number of points from her, she could fail. No way. Sorry little listener, but that's a no-go, but don't you worry. President Mike patted her on the head. Your boy's likely gonna top the charts all on his own without any points from you, but thanks for bringing your request to the station. Now keep that chin up, I'm sure you'll see him again soon. While both the power of your quirk and the control you wield over it are undoubtedly impressive, young Midoriya, I believe it is the heroic heart that beats within your chest that will make you into a truly unequaled hero one day. Always remember that there is nothing more heroic than putting others before yourself. All Might expounded as he retook the screen. Now for the points. Midoriya Izuku, 40 villain points and 85 rescue points for a whopping total of 125 points. You should know, young man, that you've broken not one but two records this day. Not only did you and young Bakugo both manage to trounce my old high score at the entrance exams, but you also broke the previous record for number of rescue points earned by a single candidate. The previous record was 80 points, and with the maximum score the panel is capable of awarding any individual examinee being 90 points, I doubt anyone's going to be breaking your record for some time to come. And just to appease your concerns, Uraraka Ochako, 30 villain points and 50 rescue points for a total of 80. You needn't worry, young Midoriya, your new friend will be joining you in UA's hero course after taking 3rd place for herself. Welcome to your hero academia, young Midoriya. I know you'll become something amazing here. I did it? Izuku muttered out, hardly able to believe it as the hologram winked out. I'm in U.A? I should have known you'd be the one to frackin' top my score, it. Katsuki laughed, though one of his eyebrows was twitching angrily. At least I still beat you in fracking villain points, and I'll still whoop your butt on Aldra's end-of-term exams. First place that's my boy. Hisashi said, every inch the proud father. Inko might have said something similar, but anything she said was unintelligible through the proud sobbing she was letting out as she hugged a still-stunned Izuku. Alright, this calls for one hell of a goddamned party to celebrate our kids not only getting into UA but totally dominating the competition while they were at it. Mitsuki cheered, reaching out and ruffling Izuku's hair proudly. Attaboy, Aizu. I knew you had it in you. In that case, I'd better head out and start getting supplies. Masaru stated, standing up. I'll go with you. Hisashi offered as he got up as well. I think I saw an advertisement for a big sale today at the local shopping arcade. Oh, well, that's convenient. As the two men left the apartment, Hisashi couldn't help but let out a sigh. I still can't believe how strong my boy's gotten. Hard to believe that part of his quirk came from my measly little party trick. He let out a small huff of smoke and fire in demonstration. I feel the same sometimes. Masaru agreed with a shake of his head. He gets his fighting spirit from his mother, but it's sometimes astounding that something like explosion came from mixing glycerin and acidic sweat. You know, Mitsuki, and I never even thought about what kind of quirk our kids might end up getting when we first got together, but I'm sure that there are people who are going to claim that she and I had some kind of quirk marriage when they see how Katsuki's quirk turned out. Bet you they'll say the same thing about me and Inko. Hisashi said with a dismissive snort. Those kinds of people are always so obsessed with quirks that it's like they can't even consider anything else. Honestly, I think that sort of thing should have been outlawed ages ago, just like that DMN quirk suppression therapy you used to see people preaching about. Well, here's hoping our children's generation will be able to do something about that kind of thing. Masaru suggested with a grin as they approached the Muzutafu shopping arcade. I can't see either of our boys letting something like that happen around them. Hisashi agreed with a short bark of laughter. We've got ourselves quite the incredible pair of kids, don't we? The very best. Masaru agreed with a proud laugh of his own. 1 month later, outside the Yayarosa mansion. This place is huge. Izuku boggled at the sheer size and opulence of the mansion he was standing in front of, having just gotten out of his father's car. Seriously, you could fit 100 copies of our apartment in this place and still have enough room for a full house. Dita, just who are these friends you said invited us over? Inko asked nervously, following her son. The Yayarozu family. Didn't I tell you? Hayashi asked with a blink. Not a word. Mother and son shot back in perfect unison. My bad, he offered with a nervous chuckle. We will be having words later, Hisashi. Inko said ominously. You could hear the capital letter in words. At least this explains the fancy new clothes you provided for this dinner. I can recognize Mitsuki's work from a mile away. Once my bosses found out that I was going to dine with the Yayarosa family, they provided their best and most luxurious fabrics for free, with the stipulation that I show our company in the best possible light. Hisashi chuckled. He looked very slick in his new black suit, while Inko looked elegant and beautiful in his opinion in her green dress that brought out her hair and eyes. Izuku, who was very much not used to wearing a suit, shifted uncomfortably in his well-tailored green suit, which had made Inko gush about how grown-up and handsome he looked in it. Now, the Yayarozu are just 3 in number, Yaoyorozu Daihachi is the family patriarch and he's guided the Yaoyorozu group since the death of his parents when he was still in his teens. Hisashi explained, giving his son and wife a bit of background on the people they were about to meet. His wife, Yaoyorozu Eiko, is a shrewd businesswoman herself and handles most of the day-to-day running of the Yaoyorozu support company. Their only child is a daughter, Yaoyorozu Momo, who is your age, Izuku, and was accepted as a recommendation student at UA just a few days before the general exam you took, Izuku. Really? Wow. Izuku perked up at that. She must have a really amazing quirk and be really good with it to be able to have gotten in on a recommendation. Everything I've heard or researched about the recommendation exam puts it on an entirely different level than the normal entrance exams, not to mention the sheer academic level you have to be at to earn a recommendation in the first place. I actually already know just what her quirk is, but I think I'll let you find out for yourself from Yaoyorozu Ojo-chan, his father remarked, giving his quirk nerd of a son a smirk when he glowered at him. The family easily walked over to the gate and Hisashi pressed the buzzer. Yes, who is it? An impatient voice asked immediately from the speakers, in a rather abrupt and terse manner in Inko's opinion. The Midoriya family here for dinner with the Yaoyorozu family, by personal invitation of Yaoyorozu Daihachi-sama. Hisashi replied respectfully, seemingly completely unbothered by the rather rude greeting. Ah, Midoriya-sama and family? Yes, we've been told to expect you. I'll buzz the gates open right away. Please step inside and then wait at the base of the path. A butler will be along to conduct you inside in just a moment. The voice answered before the speaker clicked off again. I think Daihachi needs to have a word with his staff. Hisashi let out a quiet sigh as the gates smoothly swung inwards and the small family quickly marched inside before they closed. Again, I still do not understand how servants can be more arrogant about their employer's station than their actual masters. A moment later, an elderly man dressed in a perfectly pressed, gold-trimmed butler's suit stepped out of the manor's main entrance before quickly making his way down the perfectly maintained cobblestone path that led the main entrance. He had a neatly trimmed white beard and immaculately coiffed white hair. Despite his apparent age, the man moved and carried himself with a vigor that someone half his age would envy. Midoriya-sama, my apologies for the rudeness that you were just shown by one of our security staff. There have been a couple of break-ins in the area recently and all of our current staff are still getting settled in, though that still does not excuse his rudeness. The butler offered an apology immediately after he arrived. I am Sebastian, and I act as the head butler for all of the Yaoyorozu properties. It's fine. I suppose a bit of gruffness is understandable if everyone's on edge. That is what security is for after all. Hisashi replied. Still, you have my thanks on behalf of my family. Very good then, now please follow me. Yaoyorozu-sama and his family await you inside. Sebas stated with a bow. Before performing a perfect about-face and walking towards the house, the Midoriya family obediently following in his footsteps. Is this house new? Hisashi observed, looking around the grounds. Last time I checked, the Yaoyorozu family lived in Nagoya, over in Aichi Prefecture. Indeed, that has been the Yaoyorozu family's ancestral home for the past 250 years. The butler agreed with a nod. This manor is a far more recent acquisition, originally purchased for short-term stays for business trips and the like that required a member of the Yaoyorozu family to stay in Tokyo for more than a day or so. After young Momosama was accepted into UA, her father had the house renovated to allow her a more comfortable home where she can easily commute to and from UA. They had a place this big completely renovated just so that their daughter can go to the high school of her choice? Izuku thought in astonishment. When Sebas led them into the entrance hall, it was a Western-style house. Izuku noted absently. 3 people stood there waiting for them. One was a tall man, who had black hair and black eyes. He had worry lines on his face, but also looked very dignified with them. He wore a very expensive Italian designer suit. The second person was a woman who was obviously the man's wife. She was tall and very beautiful. She had brown hair a shade or 2 darker than what he remembered Uraraka having, with warm brown eyes, and she wore a simple wedding ring on her ring finger, as well as a tasteful silver necklace around her throat. She wore a deep burgundy dress that was almost certainly been designed personally for her. The last person here was a girl around his age, who truly looked like a combination of both her parents. She had inherited her mother's looks and body type as well as her father's height, black hair and eyes, which she wore in a simple, yet elegant, ponytail. Bereft of jewelry aside from a simple choker around her neck and a decorated clasp around her ponytail, the daughter of the Yaoyorozu wore an elegant mint green dress that looked as if the same designer as her mother had worked on it. Midoriya-san. It's brilliant to have you here. The man, Yaoyorozu Daihachi Izuku presumed, greeted his own dad with a beaming smile and a booming voice. You of course know my lovely Eiko and our dear Momo. Indeed. Please, allow me to introduce you to my wonderful wife Inko and our son Izuku. Isashi gestured towards his own family. Inko, Izuku, these are the Yaoyorosis, Daihachi, Eiko and Momo. My company has worked closely with theirs for several years now, and I was personally assigned to several contracts that had me working closely with Daihachi-san. I believe we first met, I think it wasn't long after I transferred back to Japan, at that meeting in the F Nagoya office, wasn't it? Indeed. I was relieved they had someone formerly from their American office to consult with given how many issues our sales staff were having over there. Daihachi nodded. We managed to get everything operating smoothly after following the advice you gave us. Well, let us head to the dining room. The chefs have prepared us a wonderful meal, and I do hope to sit and chat afterwards. That will be perfectly fine. Inko replied with a bow. We cleared our schedule in advance for tonight, so we are at your disposal. Excellent. Eiko smiled demurely as she led the way to the dining room. Have you tried French food before? It's in 3 courses in the traditional French style. I hope you all like it. Later. Izuku was simply amazed that food could taste so good. The first course, the hors d'oeuvre he recalled it being called, had been what was called a tranche, some kind of meat jelly or pâte. It had been a salmon tranche and had been richer than Izuku had been expecting. Still, it was rather tasty. The second course, the plat principal, had been confit de canard, or a duck confit. It had been an interesting dish, as Izuku had never tried duck before. And, similar to the tranche, it had been pretty rich but still very, very good. The dessert had been a smallish bowl of mousse au chocolate, or chocolate mousse. Izuku, as with a lot of teens, had something of a sweet tooth, and he had never, ever tasted chocolate with such depth of flavor without it being overwhelming. Somehow, whatever magician the Yaoyorozu had working in the kitchen had managed to strike that perfect, nigh impossible balance. Yaizim, please pass my compliments to your chef, he couldn't help but offering as he finished. That was perhaps the best meal I've ever tasted in my life. Ho ho, high praise indeed. Seabass, please pass on our guest's praise to Chef Tsukasa. Daihachi offered with a deep belly laugh, smiling at the butler as he did as he was bidden. My apologies if I'm being a bit overly curious, Izuku-kun, but I understand that you managed to earn yourself a spot in UA's heroics department after the exams last month. Would you mind if I asked how well you did? Oh, well, in the written exams I managed to place 2nd overall out of all the students who managed to also pass the practical exam as well, only being behind the first place by 0.5%. Izuku offered, feeling a small bit of pride at the accomplishment. I managed a 97% score, which I'm quite pleased with, particularly since the public junior high I attended wasn't particularly academically challenging. I believe a 97% on one of the most difficult high school entrance exams in Japan is nothing to be scoffed at, particularly if the first place only managed a score of 97.5%. Eiko offered with a smile. What about the practical exams? Since our Momo earned one of the recommendation seats, we were invited to watch the practicals, and I must say you put on quite the impressive display there. Our Izuku managed to break All Might's previous record, scoring a grand total of 125 points. 40 villain points from taking down those villain bots and 85 rescue points from helping his fellow examinees whenever they were in trouble. Hisashi offered proudly while Izuku was too busy blushing. I should also mention that he also managed to break the previous record for largest number of rescue points earned by a candidate. Oh my! Momo offered with wide eyes. That does sound most impressive. Izuku was starting to resemble a tomato from how much he was blushing. If you'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth, I actually brought along the projector they sent as part of his acceptance letter. Hisashi offered, absently pulling the thin metal disc from his suit's BRST pocket. Oh my god, I've been looking for that since yesterday. Izuku yelped, suppressing the urge to give his father the evil eye. Well, that certainly sounds like it would be an interesting bit of after-dinner entertainment. Daihachi agreed with a nod. Momo merely got a letter informing her that she'd earned on of the recommendation seats. Which one was it again, dear? I earned the second academic recommendation, father. Momo replied, a hint of exasperation in her voice. Hisashi quickly put the small projector down near the center of the large table before tapping the button and retaking his seat. Izuku had to forcibly suppress a smile at the sheer shock on the Yaoyorozu family's faces when All Might appeared with his trademarked, "I am here," announcement. Even the utterly stoic Seabass, who just returned from the kitchens, started in shock at the sudden appearance. All Might delivered your exam results? Eiko questioned faintly. Oh my. Sounds like there's some kind of story there. You and this Bakugo lad he mentioned have met him before, Izuku-kun? Her husband asked. A long story, one I'm sure my son will be more than capable of sharing once the projection is finished. Hisashi offered, getting an agreeing nod from the Yaoyorozu patriarch. When the hologram reached Uraraka's plea to President Mike, Momo gasped. Did she really mean that? She asked in shock. She had to. There was no mention or even a hint about the rescue points until after the results were delivered. She couldn't have possibly known. Izuku confirmed with a nod. So far as she knew, any points she gave away would have damaged her own chance of getting into UA. Quite the honorable young lady. Eiko offered with an approving smile. I'm pleased to hear she passed as well. Making that kind of decision takes a strength all its own. As the hologram shut down, and Hisashi repocketed it, Daihachi shook himself, as if to cast off his shock. Well, that was certainly an informative little show, he offered. Now, I believe you mentioned there was another story about how you met All Might, Izuku? Izuku nodded, before carefully going over the story of how his quirk had first awakened and how it had led to him and his best friend, Katsuki Bakugo, meeting All Might. His parents broke in from time to time whenever he tried to downplay things a bit too much, but he was mostly allowed to tell the tale unobstructed. To think that someone would simply attack a pair of children like that. Eiko offered, shaking her head in distaste, as the story came to an end. Indeed, my dear. Quite beyond the pale, as the English are fond of saying. Daihachi agreed, his own mouth set in a firm line, before it broke into a rueful grin. Still, that is quite a way to first manifest your quirk, my boy. Silver Tyrant's Flame, I believe that's what Hisashi said it was called. Yeah, if it wasn't for my flames, I don't think Kaken and I would have gotten out of that unscathed. Izuku agreed. Noticing his mother was looking a bit distressed at being reminded of that horrible day, he hurriedly decided to change subjects and quickly went to one of his favorite gogus. Speaking of quirks, can I ask what yours are? I'm a bit of quirk nerd, you see, and I always love hearing about new ones. I do suppose that's only fair. Daihachi agreed as he held up his right hand. A moment later the skin turned shiny and reflective, like it was suddenly made out of chrome. Mine is called material shedding, a bit of a silly name I know. It is classified as a transformation type and allows the me to transform my skin, my epidermis layer to be specific, into any inorganic substance that I know of and then shed it at will. The layer of chrome covering his hands seemed to flake away, forming a small pile of thin metal strips on the table, revealing an unblemished hand beneath. The transformation and regeneration of my skin layer is fueled by my lipids, as well as whatever food I have in my stomach at the time. It has its uses, but I've never seen any real combat applications to it, since the transformation is only skin deep, as it were, he finished with a laugh. Mine is actually a bit boring by comparison. Eiko offered, rolling her eyes at her husband's love of that particular pun when it came to his quirk. He never missed a chance to use it when the opportunity arose. I call it fact printer. It's an emitter type that allows me to transform my own lipids into paper and ink and then expel them through my skin. She explained, holding out her arm. A thin line of skin along her forearm suddenly started to glow before a long strip of paper seemingly emerged from it, covered in a small image of the Midoriya family with their names neatly printed beneath each of their images. I can put any information I want onto them and even do almost picture-level drawings as long as I have a strong enough image of what I'm trying to draw. It was incredibly useful for writing reports while I was in school or for taking the minutes of any meeting I attend, but it's never been particularly flashy. My own quirk would be classed as combined inheritance from my parents' quirks, mixing the best and worst aspects of both theirs. Momo offered a moment later, raising her hand. Like her mother, the skin of her hand briefly glowed before a small matryoshka doll that looked remarkably like Hisashi seemed to emerge before coming to rest in her palm. My quirk is called Creation, an emitter quirk that basically lets me act like a living 3D printer. Using my own lipids as fuel, I can create any non-living item so long as I have memorized and can understand its atomic structure and then extrude it from any part of my body. Izuku, while undoubtedly interested in the two adults' quirks, had to fight to keep his jaw from dropping as he stared at Momo in fascination for a moment. That is truly an utterly amazing quirk. The versatility it can offer, but to be able to use at that level would be incredibly difficult. You'd have to literally memorize the atomic compositions of nearly a dozen items just make that one doll, and that's not counting the level of mechanical and engineering knowledge you'd need to make anything more complex than simple weapons like a sword. I honestly can't say I'd be able to use it anywhere near that level if I'd gotten it. You must be some kind of genius to be able to use it well enough to earn a recommendation seat at UA. The younger Yaoyorozu girl actually gaped at him in unfeigned shock at that astonishingly accurate and highly complimentary breakdown of the biggest downside of her own quirk, before managing to recover herself and blushing cherry red. I like to think that I am fairly smart, yes. She managed to get out, poking her index fingers together bashfully. Our Momo is far too modest. She managed to graduate with the highest academic scores in over 2 decades from Yukihira Junior High in Nagoya. Eiko interjected proudly, before turning to Izuku with an approving smile. And you have a very keen eye, young man. Most people tend to get so caught up in how powerful our daughter's quirk is that they completely forget about all of the preconditions that need to be met before she can even create an object as simple as a matryoshka doll. Izuku has always been rather gifted at quirk analysis. Inko offered fondly. He's written up countless journals on the quirks of various villains, vigilantes and heroes he's seen either in person, on TV, or on his computer, or even just the people he's met in passing. And not just their current and past abilities, but ways they could improve with them and possible limitations and counters as well. Dr. Matsushita himself has more than once complained that it's a shame that Izuku is so dead set on becoming a hero, otherwise he'd have gladly taken him on as an apprentice. Personally, Inko sometimes wished that Izuku's love of quirks was just a bit stronger than his drive for heroics. The life of a quirk researcher would certainly be a far safer one than that of a pro hero. High praise indeed. Daihachi offered with a blink at that little tidbit. I can imagine that kind of skill will be quite handy when you become a pro hero. I hope so. I can get a bit too introspective at times, though. Sometimes I get so lost in analyzing someone's quirk that I stop paying attention to anything else. Izuku admitted, rubbing the back of his head. Given you've only ever had Katsuki to rely on to pull you out of it at school, that's not all that surprising, Aizu. Hisashi remarked offhandedly. Why was only one person able to help him at school? Momo asked innocently. It's less about who was able and more along the lines of who was willing, the vedette offered in clarification, shifting uncomfortable. I've always been anxious, I guess, and when I go into one of my mutterings, it can be a bit creepy, and you and Katsu were never ones to let anyone play kiss up just because of how impressive your quirks are, his father added pointedly. Honestly, after you and Katsu made it clear you weren't willing to give anyone a free ride on your coattails, it was like the rest of the students there tried to pretend you two didn't exist, And those brown-nosers that called themselves teachers were even worse. You'd think adults would know better, but it just goes to show you how caught some people can get about flashy, or powerful, or heroic quirks these days. Do you really have to put it like that, Dad? Izuku groaned, blushing slightly. Momo stared at the boy opposite her in shock for what had to be the third or even fourth time that night. Although yet to have the opportunity to speak one-on-one, she was already slightly taken aback by how similar they both were, both highly intelligent, both with powerful quirks that had ended up isolating them from most of their peers. She had to wonder if this play date idea of her father's hadn't been a better idea than she had first thought. Unbeknownst to her, the spark of interest in her eyes had been noted by her mother's own keen eyes. This would result in a series of teasing remarks from the older woman later that night.